Want to do the beginning and the end, or at the end? Okay. So what I have to do is, I have to search on the call, my computer, and run it. That's fine.
Okay. Does that work for you?
Yep. It's very much if anybody needs it. You still have a Zoom call going, one minute.
And the,
Yes.
Yes.
somebody asked about, 22 Main Street, you got any more?
Yeah. So we have two.
Yeah.
We have two.
I don't know.
I had it in my.
For the 22.
Yeah. Are we supposed to look at those and then figure out which one to avoid?
Yeah.
We could do it that way if you want.
That's what I thought we would want to do. I think we needed these guys.
Oh, yeah.
But I want to go through that soon.
But we don't have enough applicants. It is.
What's on this one?
Well, there's a group of people that we do. And one of them is, I'm terrified. What's in
to get it back in 3 minutes. I'll just stop it.
You good? Yep. Okay.
We did, yes.
Yeah.
Right, no audio, no camera. It's just for letting people in because we're still waiting for.
Nope.
No, Johnson.
So it's not coming, you're gonna do the meeting tonight?
Okay.
So we have one person on Zoom. You wanna wait until we get, anybody else besides?
No,
Eric?
Eric is on Zoom.
That's
Matt
all.
was sick and John is traveling, so he's really the only one that I would.
Okay.
Is that?
Yeah, that's what I understand. I'm just gonna email us.
Hey, Eric, it's Tom. Can you hear us? Give us a thumbs up. Okay, let me just confirm I've got good audio with Eric, and then I'll have you guys talk to him, and then we'll go.
Okay.
Okay, be right back.
Hi, Eric. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Can you hear me? Yes.
Yes, he can. I can't hear him. But I would expect that, I think. You good?
Quite well. Warming up nicely.
Hey, Eric, can you hear me?
Yes.
There we go.
So what you're saying is it's my fault. Yes, I can.
I can hear you.
All right, thanks. Yep. Okay, thanks.
Would you give Tom 30 seconds?
30 seconds, yeah.
You guys are still in practice mode too.
Oh, we're still in practice mode on Zoom. Thank you, Caroline. Yeah, we're at 30 seconds, so if you're ready, if Tom's ready, we will get
Are
started.
you ready for me to start?
Good to go?
Recording in progress.
Okay. Here we go. We'll call the meeting to order at 6:05. Apologies for the delay. We are here for Freeport Town Council Meeting 2-24 in Council Chambers at 30 Main Street. If you picked up the agenda on the table, it says January 16th, but that's tonight's agenda because we postponed everything from last week to this week due to some weather and some illness. So that is the current agenda. First, we'll see who's here. We've got a smaller crowd tonight. We have Councilor Fournier.
Here.
Councilor Lawrence. Councilor Benoit.
Here.
Councilor Pilch is here and temporarily chairing the meeting. And we have Councilor Smith,
Present.
present via Zoom. Councilor Pillsbury is excused due to illness. And our chair, Egan, is excused due to business travel, making the state a better place. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United
Pledge
States.
allegiance to the flag of the United States of
For
America.
which it stands,
To the republic
nation,
for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible,
for all.
with liberty and justice for all.
All right. Next up, we have an order of business to waive the reading of the minutes of meeting 124 held on January 2nd and to accept the minutes as printed.
So moved.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilor Lawrence. Any questions, discussion? All our votes tonight are going to have to be by roll call since we have two remote councilors now. Councilor Pillsbury has arrived as well via Zoom. Thanks for joining us even though you're ill. So we have a motion on the floor to accept to waive the reading of the minutes and accept them as printed. So Councilor Fournier.
Yes.
Councilor Lawrence.
Yes.
Councilor Benoit.
Yes.
Councilor Smith.
Yes.
Councilor Pillsbury.
Aye.
And I vote yes as well. That's 6-0, which will be our vote tally tonight, as there's 6 of us voting. Next up, we have announcements. I have several. I have 5 announcements. First is that residents and visitors of all kinds are encouraged to enjoy Winslow Park year-round. For visitors to the park with canine friends, you're reminded that your dog must be kept under your control at all times so that we can make every trip to the park an enjoyable one for everybody. Secondly, nominations are now being accepted for the 2023 Citizen of the Year. Each year, the Town Council presents a Citizen of the Year award to honor those who have significantly contributed to the quality of the town. Nomination forms are available at Town Hall and on the town's website at freeportmaine.com. The deadline is coming up. The deadline is January 31st. So if you have someone you want to nominate for Citizen of the Year, you have till January 31st. Thirdly, thank you to Earl Gibson and the entire Public Works crew for the outstanding work and effort they put into the cleanup following last week's storm. And I understand there was a brand-new Public Works employee whose first day on the job was behind a snowplow. So those guys always do an awesome job, so thank you to them. Next up, tax season is here. I know everybody's excited about that. The library can help. Several tax forms are available at the front desk. and staff are happy to help you locate additional forms, instructions, and tax help. Stop by or visit freeportlibrary.com. Next up, please participate in the library's building use survey. Your feedback will help us better understand how the community uses the library building and what we should consider when planning for future renovations. Your input is invaluable in improving our services, and we thank you for taking the time to participate in our survey. So get started at freeportlibrary.com/FCL-survey, or if you prefer to fill out a printed survey form, copies are available in the lobby. Those are all the announcements I have. Does anybody else have any announcements? If not, we'll move on to information exchange. So time for counselors to exchange information with each other and the general public. Who's got stuff to exchange? Counselor Benoit.
So I've been on the review board or committee for the Fit Up grants through FEDC. So on January 11th, we gave out 2 more awards, well, 3 technically. So we awarded money to the Brewster House Bed and Breakfast for a sauna and cold plunge, which I'm personally very excited about. We also gave $10,000 between Loom Clothing and the landlord Denny Block LLC for a project at 56 Main Street for a high-end boutique. We, to date, have given out $40,000 of the $60,000. We are reviewing applications on a rolling basis, and applications are due on the 15th of each month. So the next ones will be up on February 15th.
One other item of note is there is a group planning to design a skate park at the Gorman Park, which is between or next to Bow Street Market, and they are hosting a workshop. I believe it's tomorrow night at Freeport Community Center down on Depot Street to talk about what they have so far and to get input from the community. So that's tomorrow night. Information about the skate park at Gorman Park. Any other information exchange items?
Well,
Mr. Lawrence.
yeah, there's Freeport Community Players have their annual meeting tomorrow night at the library at, I think it's 7 o'clock. So if you want to come and be part of the group, come on down, check out what we're all about.
Awesome. Anything else? Looking for our Zoom counselors. I don't see them indicating any information either, so I'll move on. Next up is our town manager's report.
So I'm still getting my feet under me, and I know that there will be a time when you look at me and say, I can't use that excuse anymore. But, yeah, I would just echo what Dan said about the Public Works team. They've been doing a great job, and they're still short-staffed. We can report for the first time in a very long time. The police department is at full staff. We hired a gentleman, Kyle Burt, who made it into the academy. He was on the wait list, and on the second day of the academy, they called and said they would take him because somebody had dropped out. So he is at the academy. He is brand new to law enforcement, so Chief Goodman expects that he would be ready to patrol likely in July or August. He'll be back from the academy in mid-May. We are, I had a conversation with Neil Lyman at Winslow Park. Unfortunately, they have experienced some impact from the 2 storms, and his capital budget is going to end up going over because he's going to need to redirect the playground funds to the fill that he needs and the work that he needs to do out at the park. He believes it's going to be another $50,000 based on the budget quotes he's gotten. Still needs to go through a formal quote process. Where that is coming out of the trust, the way that has been handled in the past is they simply would follow the town's procurement process, fix the issue, and take the additional money out of the trust. If you would like formal council action, we can set that up for February 6th and have Neil come and give us more information. Just need to know kind of what council's looking for.
That doesn't have any tax impact, right? Because taxpayers
None.
don't pay that.
Nope, none.
So, I don't feel strongly that we need to.
I think they do a great job down there. Let them go and continue. We got enough on a plate.
Yep, excellent. I told him I thought you would feel that way, but, and instead of me talking about it, one of the projects that we have underway is to try to improve communications. So Tom is working with some folks on some minor website changes, adding an agenda center and some new boards and some ability to do some communication through the website from taxpayers. We are not worried about necessarily what it looks like and the graphics and the marketing part of it. We'll wait till we bring a communications person on that can help us with that. But I will say Tom has had a lot on his plate, and we're working on that. But one of the elements that we thought would be really interesting would be to get away from the written word a little bit and see what we can do with all of the assets that we have with our cable TV. So what we want to share with you is Tom and Chris's latest and greatest public service announcement that will go live tomorrow on the website and cable TV. Tom.
Hi, I'm Chris Wolf, and I'm the Freeport Town Clerk. 2024 is going to be a busy election year. We start the year on March 5th with the presidential primary, followed by the state primary and RSU 5 budget validation election on June 11th, and then finally the presidential election and Freeport's annual election on November 5th. Maine currently has 5 qualified political parties: the Republicans, the Democrats, the Green Independents, the Libertarians, and the No Labels, which just gained party status in Maine. This year sees the change to a semi-open primary in Maine. What this means is that unenrolled voters will now have the option to choose either a Democrat or Republican ballot at the March primary. If a voter is currently enrolled in a specific party, the Democrats or the Republicans, they will still need to vote their party's primary ballot. Each qualified party had until October 1st of 23 to file with the Secretary of State's office a certification that they are going to participate in Maine's presidential primary. Both the Democrats and Republicans have filed that certification, and they will also be holding local municipal caucuses for other party building activities. The Green Independents, the Libertarians, and No Labels will not be participating in Maine's presidential primary. The Green Independents and Libertarians will choose their presidential candidate through the caucus system. The No Labels is going to use neither the caucus system or primary system for selecting their political candidate. A little bit about the voter registration process. A voter that wishes to change their party enrollment or unenroll must wait 15 days before that unenrollment or party change is effective. What this means for Freeport voters is that we would need to receive any changes by the close of business on February 15th. Any voter enrolling in a political party must stay enrolled in that party for 3 months before they're eligible to make additional changes. While we welcome the No Labels party to Maine, it came to the attention of municipal registrars statewide that some voters may have thought they were signing a petition when in reality they were filling out a voter registration card, enrolling them into the No Labels party. Voters who selected the No Labels party may show up on primary election day only to be dismayed at their potentially unintended party enrollment and that they're not eligible to vote in the primary. We encourage all voters in Freeport to reach out to the clerk's office if you have any questions about your party enrollment. As an FYI, upcoming municipal caucuses, the Freeport Republicans will caucus on Saturday, January 20th from 12 to 3 at the Freeport Masonic Hall, and the Freeport Democrats will caucus on Saturday, February 3rd at 1 at the high school cafeteria. please reach out to the clerk's office if you have any questions. Thank you.
So I'm just going to say, when you're not on delay, everything lines up. And I will also just say that we'll probably have to go in and chop the caucus part because it was going to launch the day after on the 17th as opposed to the 23rd. But I bet Tom can do that.
Can do that.
Right.
Can you check the spelling of Chris's last name, too? I think there should be an E at the end of that. Will do.
So that is what I have for the manager.
Questions for the manager? Can you bring up our remote counselors, just so we can see if they have any questions? Yeah, perfect. Good. All right. You guys good? Okay. Okay, we'll march on. We have a pretty lengthy agenda tonight, so I'll try and keep us moving along. The next item of business, we're doing our public comment a little bit differently this year. So for those of you who are new to the process for 2024, we split our public comment period into two parts. The first part, which we'll do now, is for folks in the room who want to step up to the podium or grab a mic and address the council on items that are not part of the agenda. So if you have something to say about something on the agenda, we'll wait for that item. If you have something that's not related to an agenda item, we'll give you some time to share those comments. If you're calling in on Zoom and want to participate in public comment, we'll do that at the end of the public session of the meeting. So that'll be the second half of our public comment. So for now, we'll open up the in-person part of public comment, and we've got one customer already. Step up, tell us who you are, where you live, and what you want to say.
Thank you. My name is Peter Renzwini. I live in South Freeport on South Freeport Road. I realize that the council is always very busy with property taxes, expenses during this period of time. So I felt that I needed to kind of share at a high level a couple thoughts. One is that, when we take money and pay taxes, we have a lot of taxes to pay. In Freeport, the cost of the cost that people pay in income tax is an average of $9,300 a year. The federal income tax component is about $16,500, and the property tax cost is about $4,400 on average, and the sales tax is about $2,800 based on income. So we pay an estimated of $33,000 of taxes. Then we actually have to support ourselves with, the current rate of inflation and spending. So our living expenses right now are estimated at around $56,000 a year. So that means that out of the $114,000 that the average household income makes in Freeport, it leaves them with about $24,000 of spending for kids if they're not part of the school system, the component of vacation, part of retirement. So as you work on the budget, I really would like you to keep in mind that we've got 20 grand left in our pocket, right? So don't take it all. The other thing I'd like to kind of get the council to think about is there's really three areas that I'd like you to think about as you work on the process. One is our voting on the town budget is really non-existent. I mean, we talk to you, we come in and look at it, but it's really not a process that the citizens can really vote on it. So I would like to put a bee in your bonnet that says maybe we should develop a process to do that. The second part of that is there is minimal voting for the RSU budget, and that's $39 million. And we typically are at about 30% at best for voting on that budget. In the past, we've voted that budget with 57 votes, 75 votes. So I would urge you to think about a process that increases the participation in taking some of that money. The second component I'd like you to think about is there are 14 states and thousands of school districts that actually approve their cycle, their budgets, on an on-cycle basis. What that means is they vote in November. Maine is one of the states that does not do that and does off-budget in June. And that creates, low turnout and low participation in the budget, so $39 million gets in there pretty quickly. And then the third one is really develop, there's two concepts, and I think the council supported this in late 2017, 18. One is to really continue on the process of activity-based costing and what is really driving the cost of the business, of the support that people are asking for, because I'm assuming you're not creating it out of thin air. And the second component is, I'd like to see, there's been a lot of conversations about zero-based budgeting, which is, let's look at not what we spent last year, but let's look at what services you really need to provide and what cost, return on investment type of calculations. So, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Peter. Any other comments from the public who's here tonight? Anybody going once, going twice? I forgot to introduce Mary during information exchange, but this is a fine time. Mary Davis, the president of our Economic Development Corporation, has been very hard at work on a shuttle bus. Then she's here to tell us how that went and what we can expect.
Again, Mary Davis, I'll give you a very brief update because I know you have a big, long agenda today. So what I want to say first off is, guess what? We did it. Yay. So we actually had a shuttle bus for 4 weekends in December. It ran Saturday and Sunday for 4 weekends in a row from 11 until 8 p.m. I want to do a big shout out to Jay Paulus and Kelly Edwards. This would not have happened without them. Jay actually did a lot of all the advertisements that you saw. Kelly made it happen, and actually she was the one who rented the bus. Wonderful. And Kathy Smith, who rode the bus, talked to the bus drivers and actually got off the bus and tried to solicit ridership, which was super cute. So we learned a lot. We had 100% funding from 8 businesses within Freeport. It was fabulous. Visit Freeport British Goods, L.L. Bean, Freeport Village Station, Hampton Inn, Maine Beer, Good Fire Brewing, Freeport Antiques and Heirlooms, and Wilbur's. Wonderful. 100% done by them. And the marketing was completed through lots of different sources, primarily social media, posters, signs, and such. We learned a lot. We said this was going to be a trial, and it was. We got a lot of interest from businesses after we had already closed down, asking for funds, who said, hey, how come you didn't let us know? And of course we did, but that's all right. We'll get them next time around. Ridership grew over the 4 weeks. We had, are you ready for this? We had a weekend that was as low as 9 riders over the weekend, and the last weekend we had 116 riders. So we were pretty excited by that ridership at the last. We learned a lot over the period of the time. We know that the largest ridership stops were, guess where? L.L. Bean, are we surprised? The train station and the beer companies. So we now know a lot about what we should do. Probably we had more requests to go to hotels, especially from people who got off at the train station. I learned a lot about how Ubers aren't in Freeport from people who got off at the train station, because I also rode the bus and tried to get people on it. Talking it up really helps. We needed the shuttle to look a little more fun. One of the folks said to me, am I getting on a bus that's going to nowhere? Because, it just had posters on the sides. So we know we need to do some work in making it look like a fun thing to ride. The drivers were excellent. They were all very experienced people. We hired them through Maine Coach and Limousine, so that was awesome to have their support. They knew a lot about it and helped us a lot. We know we need a bit of a faster turnaround time on Main Street. It was an hour loop, and we probably need to have one hub that goes on Main and one that goes out further. We think it was a great start, and this group is already off and on their way of thinking about how we can start back up in June. So what we thought we'd do is come back to you in February with a true plan of what we want to do in June. We still have some monies that are town monies that are unspent, and we want to do a next trial that begins around kind of the start of the summer season. But we think we've got a good foot in the door and learned a lot about trolleys and buses in Freeport. So thank you.
I know you mentioned it, Mary, but I just want to reiterate that it was provided 100% through business contributions, and I'm sure that there was a lot of prodding and asking and effort that you
There
and
was,
your
and-
crew put in to do that, so thank you.
Thank you, Dan. And I think the thing that we also heard from businesses is this wasn't a small lift for them. I mean, they really had to think about, was this the right place to spend that money? Because we know all of our businesses get asked to do donations for a lot of different things. And the businesses that donated said, we really believe that some sort of transit in Freeport is the right way to do because it hits our ecologic goals of, parking your cars and not going further. So they really believe in trying to make that happen. So shout out to the businesses who supported us. Thank you.
Awesome, thank you, Mary. Any other public comment from folks in the room? Going once, going twice. We're a friendly crowd. No more takers? Okay. Our seventh order of business, which is up next, includes all the things that we need to vote on tonight. The first one is relatively easy. It's our consent agenda, which is a collection of things that we approve all at once. Tonight, we have several donations from very generous residents to the library and to the Freeport Fire Rescue. And we have a number of appointments to deal with voting and elections, and we have an appointment to our appeals board, as well as a few resignations as well. So is there any reason we need to consider any of these individually and take them out of the consent agenda? Seeing none, I would move, be it ordered that the I'll call it the January 16th consent agenda be adopted tonight on January 23rd.
Second, or do you need the motion first?
No, I made the motion, so thank you for the second. All in favor, we'll go down the line. Councilor Fournier.
Aye.
Councilor Lawrence.
Aye.
Councilor Benoit.
Aye.
Councilor Smith.
Aye.
Councilor Pillsbury.
Aye.
And I vote yes as well for a 6-0 vote approving our consent agenda. Next up, we have tonight we actually have 5 public hearings. The first 3 are part of a set that deal with zoning and land use. And I assume we're going to hear sort of a reintroduction. We've heard a lot of this at one of our previous meetings, but probably good to recap for the public. And my question for you is, do you want to introduce them all at once, and then we'll consider each individually, or do you want to introduce at the beginning of each one? Okay. For the sake of time, why don't we try an introduction at the beginning that covers all 3, and then we can always ask more questions as we dive in.
Hold on, I have so many presentations.
Okay.
I opened the wrong one.
So in a minute, we'll hear from Cecilia Smith, who is our assistant town planner, who has been working very hard on all of these changes to comply with what was known as LD 2003, which came into effect, and we are now at the deadline to implement our changes to comply.
All right.
So whenever you're ready, take it away.
I hope you all had a time to read through the entire zoning
Every
ordinance
word.
and subdivision ordinance and shoreland, and if you have any questions, let me know, and we can bypass the presentation. All right, so basically, this is, for those of you who might be at home listening over Zoom and are not familiar with the topic, LD 2003 was passed by the state. It is an effort to increase housing and in response to the housing crisis. So we had to make a lot of changes to our ordinances to comply. I won't go into every single aspect of the rules, but just very quickly, I'm going to start with all the changes that we've done to the zoning ordinance, and then we'll move on to the much less substantial ones, to subdivision and shoreland. So next slide. So as I mentioned at the last meeting, I gave you a little overview of the different rules. Do you want me to recap them?
I'm going to say no, people can watch the previous meeting, unless there's any objection to anything else.
Okay.
But it would be, just for the record, the January 2nd meeting, I think it was? Were you?
Yes. Yes, and we also did The planning board had a public workshop on August of last year. If anyone's interested in a little more details, we covered that on that meeting. Most of the changes that we've done to the zoning ordinance have to do with these last 3 rules. And we'll go over one by one, and I'll point out to you what we have done to comply with each one of those rules. So the affordable housing density bonus, the extra dwelling units allowance, and accessory dwelling units allowance. So next slide. Now, before we move on, just a reminder that, this isn't just a blanket statement and people can build houses wherever they want. Sorry, we're having a little bit of issues with the, just a reminder that, we can still enforce shoreland zoning regulations, subdivision regulations, water and wastewater requirements are still valid. We can still conduct site plan, and dimensional requirements are still valid too, including how big your lot has to be to accommodate more housing, with the exception that the auxiliary dwelling units you do not have to have a larger lot to put more houses on it. Next slide. All right, so starting with the affordable housing density bonus, this is a highlight of the amendments we've done to the zoning ordinance to comply with this. So we added, on the definition sections, we had to add a lot of new language, which you might have seen if you were reading the proposed amendments. One of them is a new use category. So we have now a new type of use, which in zoning we have things that we call uses and what you can do. And so this is a new use called affordable housing development. It includes the stipulation that in order for a project to be an affordable housing development, 51% or over half of the units need to be affordable, and they need to be affordable for people who make 80% of the area median income for rentals, but if it's for home ownership, it's 120% of the area median income. Then we added affordable housing developments to the list of zoning districts that allow multifamily. And we created a new section, a brand new section to the zoning ordinance, which will now be section 536, the affordable housing development density bonus. So this section in the zoning ordinance will have the aspects that affordable housing development qualifies for and needs to meet. So it stipulates that they're eligible for that 2.5 times the density allowance. They're also eligible for reduced parking. So now, if you build these units, you're only required to have a maximum of 2 parking spaces for every 3 units. But again, like we mentioned at the last meeting, it doesn't mean that whoever builds these might want to do that. It just means that they can if they want to. And affordable housing developments are going to be applicable to zoning districts that, 1, allow multifamily, and 2, are either in a designated growth area or are served by water and sewer. There is a little asterisk there because this includes centrally managed water systems that may be privately owned. If you have any questions on the affordable housing and the changes that we made regarding this, you're free to ask now, or I can wait for questions afterwards. Next slide. Oh, sorry. So this is the areas that allow multifamily districts. You can see that most of them are already on our growth areas with a few exceptions. And then if you're not on that growth area, you have to have that centrally managed wastewater system. Next slide. All right. So moving on very quickly here. This is for the changes that we made to comply with the extra dwelling units allowance. So this is that rule that pretty much requires that municipalities can't have single-family zoning anymore. Freeport already allows duplexes in pretty much almost all of our zoning districts, but now we have to allow not just duplexes, but we have to allow up to however many houses they can fit, and that will depend on whether they're in a designated growth area or if they're not in the designated growth area. So in our designated growth area, a lot, of course, if it meets the other dimensional requirements, that is that acreage per dwelling unit. It may have up to 4 units in the designated growth area. And if it's not, it may have up to 3 units. So the planning board's recommendation on this one is to be more permissive than the state and allow up to the maximum that you would have gotten regardless of when you start. And the reason for that is that you had to have more land to be able to put more houses anyways. When we did changes to the zoning ordinance to comply with the extra dwellings units allowance, we mostly changed section 201, which is general restrictions. And in doing that, I just want to point out that we included language for potable water standards that apply for actually any new housing development in Freeport. And it is a little more strict than what was there before, because now there's a stipulation on the maximum levels of PFAS contaminant that the water can have. But we noticed that nowhere in our zoning ordinance there was a note about potable water, so we just talked to the code officer and he thought it would make sense to have it on that section. So that might be a change for that will apply to anyone, not just a person taking advantage of the extra dwelling units allowance. I know it can get a little complicated, so does anyone have any questions on this, or?
So as far as the potable water, that did not go through the planning board. This was a recommendation made by the codes officer, and it was added to the process, and was there public hearings on it?
Yeah, so when we were going to, so we had different drafts of how are we going to fit in this language that you can have these extra dwellings, right? It's kind of like an awkward language to put into the zoning ordinance. And at first, we just had a draft amendment that had, you may put up to 4 in designated and up to 3, and then it had, you have to meet these requirements, which are based on the state rule, like the state language. And in that, the state rule had a definition for potable water, and that definition, I can read it to you. It has, it was defined in a way, and it had the interim, I think, state of Maine resolve to protect consumers of public drinking water by establishing maximum contaminant level for certain substances and contaminants, and that includes the PFAS. So it's like an interim state. But that language was on the LD and not necessarily on the current. It's possible that very soon the state will adopt the same language. But I'm not sure where that stands because I don't follow that.
So my only concern is the rest of the language went through our process, the public hearing and everything. This is being added without going through that process. And I think sooner or later, the particular law at the state level will require to have safe drinking water. So personally, I don't like putting more hurdles for people to try to build in town. That's my personal opinion. That would be a concern. Need to have safe water, don't get me wrong.
Right,
but
this
we
is-
keep adding to different things, and I'm not sure if we want to do that.
Okay, sure.
So that bit of language did go through the public hearing process. It did come before the planning board. Sorry, I'm Sam Kapala. I'm the chair of the planning board, for in case anybody doesn't know. But yeah, it did come before the board. It was compared to a lot of the other parts of this, it was relatively last minute. The board didn't have a huge amount of discussion about it, but it seemed to us that in the interest of fairness and sort of consistency across all ordinances and all enforcement, that we should include it, and that would give a sort of a standard that the code enforcement officer can look to and apply uniformly across districts and
Thank you, Sam.
projects. So, yeah, just want to clarify that.
Yeah, and I think, overall, most of the changes that we are proposing are actually to make it easier to build housing, not harder. So it's pretty substantial that way. So moving on to the next slide, finally. So the last one is the changes that we made to accessory dwelling units to comply with the state. We already allowed accessory dwelling units throughout the entire town and residential districts in Freeport. So we didn't have to do much to comply with the state rules. But in looking at this, and because it was the first thing we started looking at while we waited for the state to come up with the rules, we had a little more time to dive into it with the planning board. And then we decided to, that we recognize that ADUs can fulfill a type of housing gap in the town, and that, because of that, we could remove some additional barriers to developing ADUs. So the recommended changes is to allow ADUs in lots containing a duplex or 2 single-family homes. The state only requires us to allow it in lots that contain a single-family home. So this is much more permissive than the state, make it easier for folks. And the reasoning for that is that those lots are already larger anyway, so we don't need to penalize those property owners. We're also increasing the maximum size of ADUs to 75% of the existing single-family home, or if it's a duplex, one of the duplexes, up to 1,100 square feet, whichever is less. So this will really help out people who are in houses that are a little smaller, because the current standard is 40%. However, if you have a over 3,000 square foot house or 5,000, it might penalize those people a little bit. The ADU won't be able to be as large. We're also removing the parking requirements as required by the state. We're removing the limitations on the number of bedrooms, which right now is limited to just 1. Removing the owner occupancy requirement. Removing certain aesthetics requirements, although if you're in the design review, you'll still have to meet those requirements. We're also removing the requirement that makes detached ADUs need to be within 50 feet of the house, so that it's no longer there. And I got a lot of phone calls about ADUs, and somebody was very happy about that, quite a few people. And we're also removing the condition that ADUs can only be built in the shoreline zone if it is connected to public water and sewer. So 2 things that may make it potentially, all of this is sort of what I would imagine and what I think of a revamping of the ADU ordinance to make it a lot easier, hopefully remove a lot of these barriers. However, if you had a much larger house, the 75% instead of 40% and up to 1,100 might make it your ADU. You can still build one, but it might need to be smaller. Another thing, too, is that because the state defines an ADU as a dwelling unit, now it could be subject to subdivision, too. So depending on when they put it. So that's a new thing that might be harder for people. But overall, it should be much easier, hopefully, to develop these. And that is most of what we had to do for the zoning. Then I can get into the subdivision. So there was not much substantial for the subdivision ordinance to comply with LD 2003. We amended this definitions so that it's the same definitions on the zoning ordinance, so that they're consistent. We also added that affordable housing developments are included in certain submission requirements, such as whatever we would already require for multifamily units, like open space and homeowners association. So it's not really substantial. But there are 2 new things that we had started working on before LD 2003 on some missing state standards that have to do with main title 38, 4,444, sorry. And we did some general cleanup. So if we could have the next slide. So the 2 new standards, our subdivision ordinance is broken in a way that we mirror kind of the state criteria language, and we were missing these 2. One of them is farmland. It's pretty much just a provision that you have to show if you're on the subdivision where they are. And the other one is the timber harvesting criteria of the state, and that is pretty much a way of avoiding that buy, cut, sell timber harvesting that is pretty damaging. So that was it for the subdivision ordinance. not extremely exciting, but we hope that with the general cleanup, we have updated some terms that were confusing because they were outdated and references to old documents. And then finally, the changes to the shoreline zoning. So we got guidance from the state and town attorneys that we don't really have to change anything in our zoning or shoreline zoning to comply with LD 2003, but we did update it to have that consistency in the definitions. So that's pretty much it for the shoreline zone. I was told to be very quick, so I hope.
Cecilia, can I just make a request that this presentation get posted along with any other materials for tonight's meeting on the website? So if people are
Absolutely,
looking
yes.
to see what's going on, they can see what you showed us tonight. Is there more to the presentation, or?
No, that was it. Unless you need more information, I'm here to answer questions.
Don't go far. There may be questions. So just procedurally, we're going to tackle these in 3 separate chunks. One for the changes to the zoning ordinance, a second one for the changing to the subdivision ordinance, and then a third one for the changes to the shoreland zoning ordinance. For each one, we'll have a public hearing, we'll have council discussion, we'll take a vote. So with that, I'll open the public hearing for the changes to the zoning ordinance. If you're not sure which one applies, don't worry about it. We'll get you in the right place. But if you have questions, comments, opinions you want to share about the changes that Cecilia just went through to our zoning ordinance, now is the time. Raise your virtual hand, step up to the podium. In each case, tell us who you are, where you live, and what you want to say.
I'm staying put because I even wrote it down on my hand so I wouldn't forget. But I did have a typo that I want to point out. It is on page 85 of the draft amendments. And it's just a little typo on that page, sort of where there's a list of uses. One of them is religious institutions, and it has a little ADU next to it. That is a complete typo. And I'm sorry that it ended up there somehow. But I would like to have our zoning ordinance passed without the typo so that the typo doesn't live there forever or until we amend it again. Thank you.
Thanks, Cecilia. Any comments for anybody in the public, in the room, on Zoom, on zoning? Big changes to the zoning ordinance, hopefully to make it easier to build housing in town. Mr. Kapala.
Sam Kapala, Chair of the Planning Board. Again, just wanted to give you guys just a super brief, summary, I guess, of the Planning Board, or just reiterate that the Planning Board, in considering these changes, obviously we started with a state mandate. And, I think there were mixed opinions on the Planning Board about the process of starting with a state mandate. Some folks feel that that's not really the way that this should be done. But that aside, we do what we need to do to be in compliance with state law. It was a great opportunity to revisit some of the policies in town, take advantage of those policies, or of that opportunity to update some things that needed updating, and really the guiding principle was fairness across properties. So in cases where we elected to be more lenient than the state requirements, that was primarily driven by a desire to be fair to property owners, regardless of their situation. So Cecilia alluded to a situation where a property owner might have, under the state guidelines at least, might have the ability to build, 3 or maybe 4 units on their lot, depending on when it was acquired and when the projects were. We felt like that was sort of an arbitrary distinction to impose on property owners, and we felt like we should try to level the playing field and make, for a given lot, if the lot is a certain size and it meets certain space and bulk requirements, no matter when that property was acquired, it should be allowed to have the same number of dwelling units. And that just seemed to us to make common sense. We apply that or similar reasoning across, a variety of, or as many cases as came up that were similar to that. We also tried to lower the barrier for ADUs in particular. I think we achieved that to a certain extent. It remains to be seen, how many people will be able to take advantage of the new relaxed requirements, but I hope we made a dent in that, and I would, encourage the council to act tonight to pass these updates and get us into state compliance. And, as always, there's more work to be done, but I think this is a step in the right direction. So, thanks.
Thanks, Sam. And pass on our gratitude to all the rest of the planning board. I know you guys spent a lot of time on this, as did the planning staff, so thank you for getting us across the finish line on this. I feel like we should be having a much bigger celebration tonight rather than just this procedural approving of the minutes, but thank you for all the work that went into it. Any other comments from the public? We're still in our public hearing process. Come on up to the podium if you don't mind introducing yourself.
Well, my name is Gary Laughlin, and I live at 75 Eagleton Drive. And I have been attending these planning board meetings. I didn't realize I had this, but I actually have a duplex, which I found out after 13 years of living on my property. And I have encouraged the board to consider that and consider including that in their changes to the LD 2003. I did provide a letter to them with my particular circumstances. I'm not sure if that's been shared with the town council, but I thought I did a fairly good job of kind of outlining why it was I would be impacted by this. And I'm here tonight to encourage you to, consider adopting all the deliberations that the planning board has gone through over all these months. They've certainly spent a lot of, time and effort on it. There's been multiple opportunity for the public to comment on this, on the changes in this. I know Cecilia sent out, as was expressed, almost 4,000 notices to the public of the hearing, of the final hearing on that. And I attended that, and I did not hear one objection or bad thought about anything that was proposed in their plan so far. I would like to, the main intention of LD 2003, or one of the main intentions of it, is to help elderly people remain on their property. And I think that some of those changes that have been done, to remain on property with changes in their health and situation. In my particular instance, my residential structure and my duplex structure would not offer any opportunity to convert that into a livable handicapped type unit. So, to that end, I had Matt come up and as being my representative of my area, and he was nice enough to come up and see my situation and to speak with me and to follow through to the point of suggesting that I be a little more proactive in my request, and therefore I did come to the planning board about that. Without this opportunity, I would have to go through a great deal of expense, and changes to my particular property in order to allow ourselves to stay on that property over time. And by these exceptions that the planning board has been willing to, to look at and approve, it has made it something that I could do. So I guess, I'm just really here tonight to ask you guys, to consider accepting those changes, and hope that you will do so. And one other thing, I'd like to thank the planning board. They did an awful lot of work on this, and they were, I thought when I first came here without any experience with the planning board or knowledge about them, that I would really see a bunch of bureaucrats who would try to, do what they could to, maintain a status quo, but instead they turned out to be a group of actual real people, and that their purpose seemed to be to help their townspeople in any way that they reasonably could. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm encouraged that you changed your opinion of the planning board, because if they were a bunch of bureaucrats, I'm afraid what that makes us. That's good to hear. Any other public comment? All right, seeing none, I'll close the public comment and open it up for the council if anyone has comments to make. I'll start by just offering an observation that I've been keeping an eye on what's been going on in other towns as they sort of tackled LD 2003. I think it was interesting what we just heard, that there were no significant objections to all the changes that we're making to allow for more housing, to allow for more ADUs, to allow for more density, to allow for more houses to be built in Freeport. So I'm proud of that. I'm proud of our town, our community. You know, we're making things easier, we're removing restrictions, and the whole town seems to be behind that, as am I personally, and hopefully the rest of us. So I'm excited about that. Councilor Benoit.
Just more praise. I read a lot of this really carefully to have questions and really couldn't find much. So I think that just goes to show the amount of work that went into this, and you know how much we can trust that work, because I really did try to find anything, and it's you guys did fantastic work on this. So thank you.
I'm excited. Let's vote, get it done. Thank you, Planning Board. We are heading in the right direction, and this is a huge step. Thank you very much.
Tempted to hand the gavel over to Daryl. Our meetings will be shorter. I like it. All right. Any other discussion? All right. We'll go down the line and vote on the changes. Sorry, we need a motion first. So, Councilor Fournier, would you mind reading the be it ordained
Certainly.
for item 1224?
Be it ordained that the proposed amendments of Chapter 21 Freeport zoning ordinance related to municipal compliance with 30A MRS 4364, 4364C be approved.
Second.
Thank you, Councilor Lawrence. The amendment for the typo? Would you care to add that amendment to your motion? You okay with that? As amended for page
With
typo
corrections
on
to
page,
typo as mentioned.
page 85. Okay.
Second.
All right. Thank you. If there's no further discussion, Councilor Fournier.
Yes.
Councilor Lawrence.
Yes.
Councilor Benoit.
Yes.
Councilor Smith.
Yes.
Councilor Pillsbury.
Aye.
And I vote yes as well for a 6-0 approval. Thank you again, Planning Board. Stick around. There's more. Next up, we have a similar set of changes that Cecilia has already walked us through. These are the changes relative to the subdivision ordinance, which is Chapter 25. So we have a separate public hearing for this. If anyone has comments that they were waiting for the subdivision ordinance to come up for public hearing, now is that time. So if you have public comment, come on up to the podium, raise your virtual hand. We can talk about subdivisions. Hearing no takers, I'll close the public hearing. Any discussion we have on subdivisions that's different than the discussion we had on zoning? Seeing none, Councilor Lawrence, would you like to read the be it ordained for item 1324?
Sure. Be it ordained that the proposed amendments to Chapter 25 Freeport subdivision ordinance, the majority of the changes are related to municipal compliance with 30-A MRSA 4364-4364-C, including LD 2003, an act to implement and recommendations of the Commission to increase housing opportunities in Maine by studying zoning and land use restrictions. Additional proposed amendments include adding and/or amending standards to comply with state subdivision approval standards, MRS 30-A 4404, and as previously discussed by the Planning Board. Several non-substantial text amendments to update reference documents used throughout the ordinance, and non-substantial text amendments for clarification purpose be approved.
Second.
Thank you, Councilor Fournier. Unless there's further discussion, we'll go right to a vote on this one. Councilor Fournier?
Yes.
Councilor Lawrence?
Yes.
Councilor Benoit?
Yes.
Councilor Smith?
Yes.
Councilor Pillsbury?
Aye.
And I vote yes as well for another 6-0 unanimous approval. Hold your applause till the end. There's one more. We have item 14-24, which is regarding shoreland zoning. So again, Cecilia went over the changes at a high level. She went over them in more detail at our meeting on January 2nd, where we had a lot more discussion and questions from the council. I'll open the public hearing for any public comment on the shoreland zoning changes. Is there any public comment?
Sorry, the last thing I want to do is slow this process down. But I did want to say two things. First of all, just to echo, there's a huge lift for staff, so thanks to them. And I'll leave it at that. I think everybody knows it was a huge lift. We're very happy to be moving on from this. Secondly, I did want to say there were a couple of comments at public meetings that did express maybe some limited opposition to just allowing more housing in town. There were some concerns about growth, or unchecked growth, I should say. I think everybody knows, towns generally, if they're healthy, are growing in our, our system. But I just wanted to make sure the council knows that there are, those concerns out there. And I think the planning board shares those concerns. And I think in particular, we'll be looking at those concerns as part of the upcoming comprehensive plan update. So any chance I get to make a PSA, to make everybody aware, I'm sure everybody in this room is, but in case anybody's watching or listening, the comprehensive plan process is getting up and rolling, and we will be talking about all of these things in much greater detail. And I think there will be opportunities to really tailor the growth areas in town, protect the character of areas in town where we don't think growth is appropriate, or where we think maybe reduced growth is appropriate. So all of those discussions are ongoing, and this is not the end of the story. So, and I, in a spin to put it in shoreland, I think the shoreland zone is an area that really needs protection. And so that's why I'm making this comment right now as part of the shoreland public comment. So again, don't mean to slow it down. Thank you guys, and we're happy to be beyond this. So,
Thank you, Sam. Thanks for that clarification too. Any other public comment? Seeing none, I'll close the public hearing and bring it up to the council for discussion. Is there any discussion at the council level?
In the words of our esteemed colleague, Darrell, let's get it done.
All right, I'm all for that. Councilor Benoit, would you mind reading the be it ordained for item 1424?
Be it ordained that the proposed amendments to Chapter 65 Freeport Shoreland Zoning Ordinance related to municipal compliance with 30-A MRS 4364-4364-C, including LD 2003, an act to implement the recommendations of the Commission to increase housing opportunities in Maine by studying zoning and land use restrictions, be approved.
Second.
Thank you, Councilor Lawrence. If there's no further discussion, once we get our other councilors back up. There we go. All right, so we'll proceed to the vote. Councilor Fournier?
Yes.
Councilor Lawrence?
Yes.
Councilor Benoit?
Yes.
Councilor Smith?
Yes.
Councilor Pillsbury?
Aye.
And I vote yes as well for another unanimous vote. So anybody who wants to applaud, now is the time. Thank you for the planning board. Thank you to the planning staff. Thank you for the town. Build houses. Okay, the next up is another public hearing. It's a somewhat related topic. I'll set a little bit of context. I think most of the people in the room know this, but in case folks are watching who haven't been a part of this very lengthy process, the three ordinances we just updated were encouraged by a state law that was called LD 2003. We now comply with that by the changes we made. Separately, we have additional rules in town for anybody that wants to build basically downtown or near downtown. That area is covered by a design review district that we have. That is covered by a design review ordinance. So separate from all the LD 2003 changes, we wanted to look at the design review ordinance and tweak some things, again, to help generate housing activity. In addition to what we're going to look at tonight, we're also going to look at a larger rewrite of the design review ordinance in the coming months and years. But for tonight, what we're have in front of us is the result of a working group we put together at the end of last summer, and we charged with saying, what can we do quickly? What can we do now? What we called it low-hanging fruit. They worked hard at coming up with a bunch of changes. They had a lot of discussion. And they're recommending the changes to us tonight for adoption for the design review ordinance. So this is the first set of sort of low-hanging fruit, or what we thought were easy changes, not the end of the story on design review, but rather a piece of the puzzle. So hopefully I got that description accurate. Is there anything that you want to add to that, Caroline? Nope. Succinct, okay.
You gave it 10 minutes on the agenda, so.
I only used like one of them, so. All right. Are there any questions or discussion from the council before we open this motion? I think we've kind of heard about this up here as well. With that, we have a short staff tonight, so can I go back to Councilor Fournier to read the be it ordained for item 1524?
Be it ordained that the proposed amendments to Chapter 22 Design Review Ordinance be approved.
Second.
Oh, there is a public hearing, okay. Okay, yeah, can you read the ordinance, then we'll do the public hearing. I think that's fine. Thank you. Okay, was there a second? Okay, thank you, Councilor Lawrence. I overlooked that there is also a public hearing for this. There was a little note missing in my agenda. So we have a motion on the floor, but we will enter a public hearing because there are a lot of substantial changes in this, and I imagine that anybody who didn't get to comment at the working group might have comments tonight. So are there any comments from folks who were on the working group, because I see a few of you here tonight, or from the public?
Yeah, I didn't necessarily want to lead it off, but so in addition to chairing the planning board, I chaired this working group as well. And I think Dan summed it up really well. This is not the end of the story here either. This is very much an ongoing effort. I would really strongly encourage you guys, as I suspect you will, or at least I hope you will, I would encourage you to adopt these as written tonight. I know there's lots of other things that could be done, other considerations that can and will be up for discussion in, as Dan said, the coming months and years, but we really just need to get this done now. It's been the result of a lot of discussion, a compromise from a lot of interests in town. So I think, there was a process that we threw a lot of stuff at the wall, and then we really pared it back to see what was palatable to everybody in the room. And we took public comment. The process did go through the planning board as well, so the planning board had a chance to weigh in. The planning board did make the not insubstantial change of changing the working group's recommendation to change the appeals process. Hard to say all that, but I would encourage you folks tonight to move this forward so that we can get our RFP out and let the Central Core Working Group go back, or whoever is going to sort of shepherd that RFP through the process of overhauling design districts in town. We really need to get that going, and I'm excited about that. So thanks again.
Thank you, Sam. Any other public comment? It's almost too easy. All right. I'll close the public hearing. We're still open for council discussion. I'll just make two comments. Whoa, sorry, we do have a hand up on Zoom. Oh, sorry, no, we got a counselor. Counselor Smith.
You can go ahead. You can go ahead, Dan. I will have something to say, but I'll let you go first.
Okay, I'll be quick. Two items that I think generated some. A lot of items were discussed at length. There were two that stick in my mind as being worthy of me commenting and highlighting them tonight. One is the boundaries of the design review district, and the other is the appeals process. So the boundaries, the part of what we're asked to vote on tonight is shrinking the boundaries of the design review district to make it smaller, to say we don't need to have such an intense design review of, say, properties on Lower Main Street on the way down to Shaw's and Gritty's. There was some discussion about shrinking it further. Kind of went back and forth a few times. We landed where we did. There's a map at the end of one of the items on the website that says Chapter 22 with maps that talks about the new proposed district. So we shrunk it quite a bit, but not as far as some had wanted. I think it's a nice compromise. I'm in support of where we landed. The other item is the appeals process. So the way things work today is if someone gets a permit from the project review board and they don't like the decision, whether they were approved or rejected for their permit, if they don't like the decision and they want to appeal, they appeal to another town volunteer board called the Zoning Board of Appeals. And that board is meant to hear appeals from the work of the project review board. That process was debated at length about whether we should have appeals go from the project review board straight to court, or project review board to the Zoning Board of Appeals here in town and then to court. Initially, the working group said, let's take the middle part out to speed the process up and go from project review board to court. When the planning board heard the public comment on that and a lot of the planning board comment on that, they decided not to make that change. So we're not recommending that change be made. And that's I think in the spirit of moving things forward quickly. I know there are some folks that would like to revisit that at some point, but that's not on the docket tonight unless somebody amends it and puts it up there. So I just want to highlight that there are two things that I thought generated a little bit more conversation than most. That's all I've got. Councillor Smith.
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to say thank you to everyone who made this amendment or these amendments possible, particularly from the working group as well as the planning board in taking this on, in addition to all of the 2003 issues, as well as starting the comprehensive plan. Knowing that this is a work in progress, I think this is really good progress. I was just going to make a comment on the boundary issues as well. One of the most significant changes is shrinking the boundary of the design review district. And from my perspective, the design review district really is about having a cohesive downtown where there is real intentionality about how that center of our downtown, both from a residence perspective as well as a commercial perspective, works. And I think that our design review ordinance, while it is contentious at times, has really done a lot to provide for a cohesive downtown. And I'm glad that we're adjusting it to continue to maintain that effort. I just want to point out that in shrinking the boundaries, I don't think the intention is to say that we're eliminating oversight in other parts of the downtown, particularly the lower Main Street area. And that was a part of some significant conversation, I know, all the way through the process. I also just wanted to point it out that the design review ordinance is not a historic preservation ordinance. We certainly have a lot of historic buildings in the downtown, and this ordinance does set some protection around those in terms of timeline and as well in terms of changing the exteriors of those buildings as well as all buildings. But I want to point out that we have historic buildings throughout the town that do not fall into design review. And I think there is some interest in pursuing something that is town-wide that gives us some more protection over those historic buildings. So all of that is to say, I'm in support of all changes here, and I'm appreciative of all the people that put in so much time to make it possible.
Thanks, Eric. Any other comments, questions? Seeing none, we'll go to another vote. So Councillor Fournier.
Yes.
Councillor Lawrence.
Yes.
Councillor Benoit.
Yes.
Councillor Smith.
Yes.
Councillor Pillsbury.
Aye.
And I vote yes as well. Another unanimous decision. So thank you again to everybody who served on the working group and everybody else who was involved. I do want to make a comment that even though we're moving very quickly through very substantial changes to a lot of our zoning and design ordinances, I don't want the public to think that we're not thinking carefully about this. The reason that we're able to move so quickly is because we've been looking at this for so long. We discussed, I mean, if I try and name all of the opportunities that we created for everyone to get involved in this, I'm going to miss some, so I'm not going to try. But I know we had several, many public workshops, all of the meetings of the working group, the planning board, the council are all public meetings. So there's been tremendous amount of focus, discussion, public input on all of the four things that we just approved. And by and large, I think there's a tremendous amount of support. The fact that there's not a ton of controversy, there's not a ton of people marching up to the podium, raising their hand, saying, hey, I don't like this, speaks to the hard work that everyone did. So even though we're moving quickly tonight, it doesn't mean that we rushed any of this through. I don't think anyone would accuse us of rushing this from my perspective. So thank you again, and I look forward to all of the development this is going to stimulate in town.
So I think that our town planner is thrilled at the wonderful summary that happened, but I am going to ask her to put her slide presentation on the website so people can see it, along with the LD 2000.
I have a new one that's no one's ever seen, but I'm happy to put that up.
All right, thanks.
Oh, on the design review changes?
Yeah.
Okay.
You did great.
Okay.
I don't feel the need to present. I can.
You
You can look at it online tomorrow.
Is it fair to say if they watched the? Yeah.
You would still vote yes, because I made it a point to put a lot of the things Daryl's been wanting into knowing that you've changed, that you just approved up there. So you'll be good.
Thank you, Sylvia. And thank you, Caroline. And you walked through a lot of that at the recent planning board meeting, so.
And at the
folks
last
wanna see
meeting, we
that.
went through a lot of it in detail. I just did a little more cut and paste. People can look at it tomorrow.
Thanks. All right. We, I think, are ready to move on to item 1624. This one has to do with moorings outside of the Harrisseeket River, another item we have spent a very long time on, especially with our friends in the Coastal Waters Commission. So this item is to consider action relative to proposed amendments to Chapter 31 of our Coastal Waters Ordinance that would require registration of moorings within the anchorage outside of the Harrisseeket River. Again, this one has been discussed at length at several Coastal Waters public meetings, has also been discussed at length at several council meetings where we've previewed the changes, namely at our last meeting where we set this public hearing. So now we have a public hearing tonight, and then if we choose to, we can vote to accept the changes that would require registration, and then later on, there's a separate item we get to vote on, 2 or 3 items down the agenda, where we actually officially set the fee that would go along with the registration. So first we vote on the registration, later we vote on the fee. But during the public hearing, feel free to comment on either one. So with that, I'll open the public hearing for item 1624. If anybody wants to step up and share thoughts, please tell us who you are, where you live, and what you want to say about this item. It's a very crowded room for a lack of public input. I assumed we would have more. Though I'm looking around the room, a lot of folks work for the town. Okay. Yes, feel free to bring her over. I think a lot of talk is what we usually do. Gretchen, are you there? Can you hear us?
This is actually Ethan.
Okay.
Her husband. Gretchen is right next to me if you
Got
want
it.
to talk to her.
Okay, we can hear you fine, so go ahead whenever you're ready.
Terrific. First of all, name's Ethan Parker, obviously, and thanks for the opportunity to speak tonight. Really appreciate it. My wife and I are riparian owners at 1 Dixon Road in South Freeport. To reasonably understand the 2 points I want to make tonight about the proposed changes to the coastal water ordinance, it would take, I think, far more time than you want me to have right now, which is why I sent everyone a letter, which I hope you have, that provides more detail and some reference to statute and ordinance. Hopefully that's helpful. One thing I'm a little confused about is just now there was a comment that the proposed changes are only about moorings outside of the anchorage, but in reading the proposed changes, I don't see any language, at least on the topics that I want to point out, that differentiate proposed language so that it only applies outside the anchorage. To me, the way I read it, everything applies to everything, specifically about what I'm going to talk about tonight. So with that said, I'm going to move on. So I'm going to talk about 2 things. First, in the proposed changes to Article 5, mooring assignments, Section 1, of page 7, the proposed language requires that in order for the harbor master to grant a riparian owner a shorefront mooring, it must, the mooring must not interfere or threaten the safety of existing moorings. So on the surface, that seems logical. However, state statute is very specific about what the harbor master must do when asked to grant a riparian mooring, and which factors the harbor master may consider when doing so. Existing moorings is not one of those factors. So my letter to the council includes a great example of why existing moorings should not be a factor and why I think it was not included in the state statute. It's just my speculation. But unfortunately, having considerable experience on this topic regarding our own mooring in front of our property, which ultimately involved attorneys on the town side and our side, we prevailed in the end. But anyway, just wanted to let you know that we do have a bit of qualification on this point. So I believe the proposed language would attempt to alter what the statute what statute says, which I don't think the town ordinance can do that. So my belief is that the proposed language could easily lead to conflicts, confusion, misunderstanding, even, God forbid, exposing the town to some legal challenge if the matter was brought up. My second point has to do number 2, or section 2 in that same Article 5, again, page 7, which proposes that as of the date of the ordinance's inception, yet to be determined, all existing moorings within the anchorage shall be grandfathered as to location preserved, but are subject to all other applicable provisions of this ordinance. So it makes a little bit of sense. That'd be nice. However, I believe this conflicts with section 14 of the ordinance, Article 5, that's page 10, because each year the harbor master must reapprove all existing moorings, and the ordinance says that at all times the following priority order shall be maintained, and a grandfathered status is not in that priority order. Now, you could argue that mooring location is not relevant to assignment priority order. However, state statute also, and you can see my letter for the reference to this, but state statute requires that the harbor master, to paraphrase it for brevity, shall change the location of those moorings from time to time when the crowded conditions of that harbor render the change desirable. So therefore, I believe that there's a strong argument that when changing assigned mooring locations to accommodate crowded conditions, which we're at that point, if not beyond, a grandfathered status can't be a consideration. So my question is, what's the point of introducing this grandfathered status when it seems it's more likely to cause confusion, misunderstanding, and again, possible legal challenge if someone on the wait list kind of was smart enough to figure things out?
You're not on the wait list.
To me, allowing the proposed language that I commented on tonight to become ordinance could easily lead to more problems than it may solve. So with that said, I'd love to take any questions, and I thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Parker. Thanks for chiming in. I know we talked at length about it, so I'm glad to hear you address the council on it too. Looks like Councilor Smith has a hand up.
I do. I just wanted to respond to those comments and perhaps point out something that may or may not address the concern. And I understand that this has been a topic of conversation and for a lot of folks through Coastal Waters Commission and in front of the council multiple times. But I do think there is some confusion around the terms anchorage versus harbor. And just to clarify, when we're talking about the anchorage, we're not talking about just the harbor. We're talking about all waters in the town of Freeport, with the exception of what surrounds Buston Island. And so when I think Mr. Parker was just discussing those numbers 1 and 2, we're not talking just about what's in the harbor, but mostly these newly required moorings that would be outside the harbor, and that really it's the language that's not changing, starting with number 10, that's section 5, number 10, where those are where we're talking about the locations that are specifically within the harbor, which would be what you would be talking about there on Dixon Road. I don't know if that helps clarify that, and I'm hoping that Charlie might be present to answer questions about that as well.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. I think that's an accurate description of where things apply. While we're on it, Charlie, I do have a question. I don't know if it's best for you or for the Coastal Waters Commission, but to Mr. Parker's point, what I think he's concerned about, this is sort of what I took away from the conversation, is that if you're a riparian owner, state law says that where practicable, the harbor master shall grant you a mooring, if it doesn't interfere with the channel. And then my understanding of his question is, state says where practicable, we should be able to give you a mooring if it doesn't interfere with an existing channel. The town ordinance that we're proposing says we should grant you a mooring if it doesn't interfere with a channel or an existing mooring. So my question is that something you guys studied carefully that you want to advocate for leaving as is?
Yeah, that is something we did take a look at, and I did get Mr. Parker's comments this weekend, so I didn't have time to review them thoroughly. But again, it comes down to what's practicable. Is it practicable outside of the harbor, you know, on Lower Flying Point, where some folks don't even have 100 feet of shore frontage, they might only have 50 feet, and you have moorings kind of stacked out front. Are you going to move, you know, 3 or 4 moorings because someone wants one in that exact spot? You might find that it's practical to do that, or you might find that it's not practical for someone to, you know, because they want that mooring in that exact spot, you're going to ask several people to move their mooring as well. So that was an attempt to kind of address that issue. In the grandfathered section, that was meant to alleviate some of the concerns that we heard in many public comments. Well, what's going to happen to my mooring that's out there right now? So after this, you know, if it does get adopted or whatever that date would be, your mooring is grandfathered, but at any time, you know, based on whatever circumstance, I as a harbor master could ask you to move your mooring to a different location because of whatever the case may be. So you're not like, you don't own that specific location. That's just saying, as of that point, whenever the time is when this gets approved, that location's good. But doesn't mean 2 years from now that location's going to be good, if that makes sense.
That applies to all moorings. Well,
that's all moorings.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks for that clarification.
Yeah, and I can, you know, I can have, if you guys wish, legal review to review Mr. Parker's note. Like I said, I haven't read it in full detail, but.
Yeah, no, we're still in public hearing too, so why don't we see what other public comments come up, and then we can still chat more if we need to. Any other public comment from anybody in the room or on Zoom? Again, I know we've had a lot of public comment at our last meeting. 20 or more folks spoke about this, so again, even though we don't hear it tonight, we're aware of that. Seeing no other activity, I'll close the public hearing and bring it up to the council for any further discussion. Councilor Fournier.
I'm wondering, I don't want to adopt an ordinance that may create legal ramifications down the road for, property owners and people on the shore. So I'm in favor of the ordinance, but I'm wondering if it needs to be tweaked on this one particular area. So I guess I have a question of procedures this evening. Could we in fact adopt this and maybe send out this specific section of the ordinance that looks like there may be a conflict to legal review and correct it, or would you have to table it and send out for legal review first? That's kind of the question of what we might have to do procedurally. I don't want to hold it up longer, but also I don't think it's prudent to pass something that may create a conflict down the road.
So where this is an ordinance, if you adopt it, I can't change it. I can't delay its effectiveness. So it really needs to be done the correct way the first time. That said, I don't normally like to do the staff conversation, but at council meeting, but in general, within the statute, if a municipality wants to do something more restrictive than the statute, it's perfectly fine. I don't know, Charlie, if there's something special with marine ordinances, just because I am not used to coastal water.
No, that's right. You just can't make it broader than the state statute. It's just like our, shellfish ordinance. We get much more restrictive in that ordinance than state law allows. Another thing that I'd just like to add, kind of like the zoning ordinance. This ordinance, we bring it back to you guys every year for some tweak, some issue that we have found in the past or that's not working right. So I am in full confidence that I will see you guys again at some point. And it might be over something like this, probably something completely different. But this ordinance is very much a constant working document, so to always improve it. So.
Councilor Lawrence?
Yeah, so his one objection really was threaten the safety of existing moorings, and that's just to the location where they want it. But you probably granted it, they said, well, you could have it over here instead of right there.
Yeah, so.
That's really the extent of that particular line.
That's correct, yeah. Fronting your property is somewhat of a, it's not vague, but it's fronting. So, in Harpswell, they actually specify that you can go up to a half mile out. So, fronting is fronting. It doesn't mean it's 100 feet, 200 feet. It's, it's fronting your property.
Yeah, can you go up to that podium, Joe, just so everybody at home can hear you as well?
Hi, I'm Mary Jackson. I'm on Lower Flying Point Road. And I am just wondering, when Charlie had mentioned that there might be cases where outside of the anchorage, like over in our area where we have the Swans people and we have moorings sort of dotted around our area, what's a circumstance that might come up where we would need to move those moorings? As you said, you might need to. I'm just trying to think of, is that something we would have to worry about happening every year, or what actually would cause it? Because, there's only like 6 of us over in that area. I'm just concerned to be forward-thinking and say, well, I need to know, because I'm one person, and it's a 150-pound mushroom, so yeah, I have to plan ahead.
Yep.
Thank you.
Great question. Charlie, do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, so moving moorings out in that area is few and far between. The only circumstance where I might see something happening, let's say you're in a condensed area, you have 6 moorings around you, you have a 20-foot boat, and you want to get a 40-foot boat. Right. Chances are I'm going to say, hey, you don't fit right there, let's move you a little farther out, where you have the swing room, and go from there. But, if not, common sense stuff, if nothing changes in your area, I'm not just going to randomly target a mooring one year and say, hey, you've been there long enough, so, Yep.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thanks, Charlie. My take on this, to address your comments, in talking to the Parkers, I had a good phone conversation with them. They went through sort of an ordeal. There's a lot more background and history there. My understanding is that there's no current action pending. Everything has been resolved, so everything is okay for now. So the question is going forward. I don't feel like I know enough to say we can remove the language, leave the language in. It doesn't seem offensive to me. I'd rather adopt it and then revisit it if we need to. We could certainly have a legal review just to say, hey, we just adopted this ordinance. Do we need to revisit it tomorrow, or is this something we can look at in a year? And also point out that any of Charlie's decisions can be appealed to coastal waters. So by asking to get on the coastal waters agenda, they can say Charlie was wrong, or we don't think he made the right decision, and get things changed. So if there is something, it can be resolved pretty quickly within town. So I'm in support of it. Other questions, comments from the council? Seeing none, I think we need to read this one in. I think we're up to Councilor Lawrence, if you don't mind.
Be it ordained that proposed amendments to Chapter 31- Coastal Waters Ordinance to require registration of moorings within anchorage be approved.
Second.
Thank you, Councilor Fournier. Any further discussion? So we'll go to a vote. Councilor Fournier?
Yes.
Councilor Lawrence?
Yes.
Councilor Benoit?
Yes.
Councilor Smith?
Yes.
Councilor Pillsbury?
Aye.
And I vote yes as well for a 6-0 adoption. With our gratitude to the Coastal Waters Commission and the Harbor Master and all of the residents who have thought about this, weighed in, provided comments. I know it's been a long issue. Not everybody agrees 100%, but hopefully we're moving in a direction that people are comfortable with. So thank you for all the work you put in over the years, I think, to get where we got to tonight. Okay, hearing no applause, I'll move on. Item 17-24, we are done with our public hearings for tonight. This one is to consider action relative to setting a public hearing next time for, relative to proposed amendments to our zoning ordinance pertaining to new cannabis uses. So do we have a background on this before I jump in and try and do it on my own again? I'm happy to stop talking for a minute. Is okay.
I'm just going to have to bring those down if ever I'm supposed to.
So while Caroline's setting up, one context I'll just start adding very briefly, and I'm not going to steal any of your thunder, is that we studied this at council starting in, I believe, 2019. When, you looked at it before. That's right. That's when I joined, yeah.
This is not
Right.
short.
It was already a pending item when I joined the council in 2019. So there was a lot of discussion at council.
Yes.
And then at some point, a couple of years ago, we referred it to ordinance, and then planning got involved. And our directive at the time with the council we had at the time was, can we allow for some cultivation in town and no retail?
What was it? Yeah, it was cultivation of retail. It was cultivation of retail, or allow someone to split the use. Of, they could do medical,
Right.
couldn't do
Right.
recreational harvesting and growing.
Right, but no retail storefronts.
No retail storefronts.
Right. And I think you'll probably get into that detail, so I won't.
Okay, so Tom's gonna make a change on the computer.
Okay.
So, everybody's right. We've been talking about this for a long time. I think one of the last big public meetings I ever went to, pre-pandemic, this room was packed,
Yes.
overflow in the hallway, and we talked about cannabis. So in 2021, you did refer to the planning board for them to take a look at possibly creating land use standards for cannabis manufacturing and cultivation. Didn't want them looking at retail, and you didn't get into specifics about, is it just medical or is it adult use? So you sent that directive. Well, we were in a pandemic, we had an election, so they spent most of calendar year of 2022 talking about cannabis and made some land use recommendations. Couldn't really do the land use, take action on the land use recommendations without having a licensing ordinance various reasons for delay, you haven't had both of them. Tonight, you have both of them. Because we have been talking about this for so long, you have some draft amendments here, and they are in an older version of the zoning ordinance. You also made
Significant changes to the zoning ordinance on items 1, 2, and 3 on your agenda tonight. So you will see this in a pretty cleaned up version. We'll be typing fast away tomorrow. And then to further change it, in your packet, you had a new version with highlights. Because as we were working on the licensing ordinance, we found spots in the zoning ordinance that non-substantive amendments should be made to provide further clarification. Not changing anything, but making sure the two were consistent. We were clear with references to state law. And then in some cases, there's uses, and we'll get into this, that Freeport is not going to permit, but we need to define them so when we say this is not permitted, you know what they are. You want me to keep going, or are you good?
You're doing great without your slides.
All right, I'm going to wing it. Let's see. Okay, perfect. So, oh, no, you're good. You got it working. I thought I was just going to have to put it online again tomorrow. So that's what we covered. So you've listened to us talk a lot tonight, so I won't bore you too much. But you do need to understand at a high level, for both this conversation and the next conversation, the different types of cannabis. So there's different types of cannabis under state law, and I'm making this very simplistic. You have adult use, you have medical, there's retail stores, there's cultivation, there's manufacturing, and there's testing facilities. There's some types of cannabis that under state law we have to allow. They're probably already happening here. You may or may not know it. So you can go grow cannabis for your own use in your own home. There's certain limit of plants, and you have to be over age and all those things. And then there's also exempt caregivers, and those might be people like if I was growing for my sick family member, really small scale for yourself or your family. And we have to allow those, and those are clearly defined, the highlighted yellow version that you got in your packet. There's also this other category called registered caregivers, and those are people that are registered through the state to grow medical cannabis, and we do have to allow registered caregivers. They're different than exempt caregivers because they can grow a different number of plants. They can grow up to 30 mature plants, and they have some different licensing requirements. So we have to allow them. They're already here today. If we are going to allow them, we can put some reasonable restrictions or regulation around it, but we cannot cap them, and we cannot be so restrictive to create a cap. So as you go through and look at both the licensing and the land use ordinances tonight, you'll see that there's a new use of medical cannabis small-scale caregiver operation. So the approach taken here is that if you're a caregiver in Freeport and you're growing cannabis out of your own home, you can continue to do that as a home occupation. Many people are doing it. Home occupations can be done anywhere in town. They don't have to register. And there are some exemptions and standards that go along with it. If you are a caregiver and you're growing, but not out of your home, you're going to fit into one of the commercial uses that we're going to talk about in just a minute. So a couple things to keep in mind. One other point I want to make is we talk about no retail stores, but caregivers who are growing on that small scale out of their home, you can go to their house if you're a patient and get your cannabis. They don't usually have a big sign, they don't have a flag, they don't have what we think of a big commercial storefront, but there could be some selling, and there's nothing we can do about it. Not a retail storefront, and some of the highlighted language in here is trying to clarify that that is not permitted in Freeport. So just to clarify, the small-scale caregiver operations, they could be commercial or non-commercial. They would dispense solely out of the caregiver's residential dwelling or accessory structure. So I myself don't live in Freeport, so I can't be growing out of Chip's house and run my business. So this, again, we're treating this just like any other home occupation with a couple tweaks. They don't process or manufacture cannabis using chemicals or solvents, and they cultivate no more than 30 mature cannabis plants. Now, that doesn't mean you're going to go in there and you're only going to see 30 plants, because plants are at different phases. If they had the 30 mature, that estimate that I've gotten is it could be a couple thousand square feet. So they might need a big building if they're really maxing out on this. We have existing home occupation standards. You can do it by right. You don't need to register, but we did have to we added a couple things for cannabis. So you can't store your plants outside. We do have to exempt them from some of the size limitations because, again, under state law, they have to be able to grow up to the 30 plants, and they might not be able to do that in our current limits. So we had to change that. And again, allowed in all zoning districts. So then we move on to the new uses of cannabis establishments. So this is back to that council directive to the planning board to look at cannabis cultivation and cannabis manufacturing facilities, 2 different uses. And so when the planning board looked at this, they looked at other zoning districts that allowed manufacturing and processing and are basically mirroring those standards. So you have this map that Cecilia created. It shows the districts where manufacturing and processing is allowed and where these 2 new cannabis uses would be allowed. To be clear, and as listed in the ordinance, doesn't include testing, doesn't include retail stores. None of those are permitted in the town of Freeport. These are in the zoning ordinance, the 2 commercial use. They could be adult use or medical, listed out as 2 separate uses subject to site plan review before the project review board. So again, 2 different uses subject to site plan review. There is one exemption to the site plan review. We do have a couple of cannabis uses in Freeport. I believe they're as caregivers, I believe they're cultivating, but they went in under old rules and legally under manufacturing and processing. So if those uses want to stay where they are and not make any changes, they would not need to come through site plan review. They're already in properties that have been through site plan review. If they want to do an addition, they want to expand, they're coming to project review for a site plan amendment just like anywhere else. There are not thresholds built in here for staff approval or staff review board. Any changes to cannabis would go directly to project review. There's a whole new section about cannabis regulations. I'm assuming you've all had time to go through it in the inches of paper we gave you. But there are some new standards, things like signage, odor, safety, lighting, waste disposal, pretty standard things. Outdoor cultivation is prohibited, and there would be inspections required by certain town staff, fire chief, police chief, health officer, et cetera, before they can get a certificate of occupancy. So under state law, the adult use regulations do require a buffer from certain uses from cannabis establishments. It's not required for medical, but because we are treating the commercial, those 2 categories, as the same thing, we do have a buffer requirement built into the standards. The minimum would have been 500 from schools and daycares. In this case, the planning board decided to go 1,000 feet. So if you are coming into Freeport to put a new cannabis establishment, you're going to have to show on a map that there's no school or daycares meeting the certain definition within 1,000-foot radius. If you get your approvals and you're legally operating and someone decides to open a school next to you, that's on them. They can do that. But when you come in, when you make the application, it's determined complete, this is made, and that's what we go forward with. If a school comes in even after your application's complete, you don't lose it. Like when you're in, you're in. And then the planning board also put on their own requirement that there be a 100-foot setback from a residential structure that's located on a separate parcel, and that would be measured in the shortest distance. This is another nice map that Cecilia created back in 2022. In 2022, when the planning board talked about this was an example of schools and daycares that were licensed through the state and that meant that definition to require the 1,000-foot buffer. I know we've had 2 additional schools that have since come in, but again, this would really be on a case-by-case basis when the applicant comes in, and in some cases, this will be a limiting factor. In some of the smaller zones, even where the uses are permitted, the sensitive use buffer might come into play and not allow it. that is a crash course in land use regulations in cannabis. Does anyone have any questions?
Clarifying question, because I'm new to the conversation. So the facilities that exist right now, I know there's 2 near my house, for example. So are those aren't processing now, or what's sort of their current operation?
There's 2 establishments in the Route 1 North areas of Freeport that went in to manufacturing and processing facilities when they came in back in the day. They were caregivers, and they were looked at as fitting into Freeport's definition of manufacturing and processing. One of them just went in, and then one of them got the change of use. The rules have changed. You can't do it that way anymore. You have to opt in to allow these uses in your town, but that's how they got there, and that's kind of why this is written, to let them stay if they don't change.
And they're processing as well, so they're growing, cultivating, and processing.
I'm not 100% sure. I know they're cultivating. Some of you have heard from a lot more growers firsthand over the past couple years, but they went in as licensed caregivers.
Yeah, just mostly out of curiosity. Yeah.
My understanding from their participation in some of these is right now they are in there as caregivers and they can grow for medical. A lot of people that are doing that want to enter the market to grow for adult use, and they currently can't because we have not opted in to allow that in Freeport.
Which is what brought this all to the forefront.
Yeah. Lots of minutes on this if you want to read back. We have them all pulled together.
If the facility is approved, all that they've built, and now they want to expand and a school goes in, does that change?
They would still be there, so I'd say they'd be grandfathered from it.
Right, but would they be able to grow if they needed to because?
Yeah, I would say they would because they were there first, and then the school went in, and they usually look at the parcel.
Okay.
Again, if the state rules change, those come into play, they would trump us, but the state would, for the adult use, would only be 500, so we're stricter than that.
And we have this in 2 pieces, right? One to do with land use and zoning, and then one to do with licensing. Can you talk about why that is?
Yes, so the land use has to go through the planning board because it's part of the zoning ordinance, so legally under state law. Licensing, a lot of towns are doing the licensing separate. Some towns are actually putting some of the performance standards that we have in our land use ordinance into licensing because you asked the planning board to look at developing the land use standards is kind of how we ended up that way, but most towns have 2 separate if they want to license them.
And did your talk cover the licensing as well, or do you have separate comments?
It did not. I do not have a fancy presentation for the licensing. You will have me at the podium with my handwritten notes. But you need to understand generally this to understand the licensing. Happy to move on, or?
Yeah. Could I ask you to cover the licensing stuff, even though we're only dealing with the zoning on this particular order, which we'll do in a minute?
Okay.
I think it's good to have that context as well, so we know what's coming behind it. Second one is dealing with licensing, but I thought it might be good to have the background, so that when we set this public hearing, we'll still vote on 2 public hearings, but at least we'll know all the stuff.
The cannabis licensing had gone to ordinance committee at one point for some initial feedback, but this is the first complete draft that's really been out there. This is a working draft. We've since looked at it a little more. There'll be a little more cleanup and some non-substantive changes. A few of us have been foggy-headed. As we've gotten removed from that, every time you keep reading, you find another tweak. So we'll get feedback today. If you guys decide to go forward, this too will be cleaned up with some minor modifications available for public viewing. And there's a couple areas that there might be some tweaks, and I'll point those out to you. So I'm going to take a more boring approach for this one. I'm just going to kind of walk through more as a page turn. So I would say when we created this, we worked very closely with the town attorney because cannabis is really complicated. There's so many rules and laws and ins and outs, and when you get into capping or limiting licenses, it creates challenges in some communities. That being said, there's certain things we know the council wants. The council wants us to streamline things. The council doesn't want us to make unnecessary submission requirements or burdens. So when this was developed, we took some of those things out, or things like that might have been in there, we consciously made an effort to be like, why is this in here and what are we going to do with that information? If the answer was nothing, every town may have it, but we know that's not right for you guys because that's what you've been telling us. For example, one thing a lot of towns have is background check. So I was like, what are we going to do with background check? Nothing, we're just going to do a background check. But when they're licensed through the state, they go through a background check and they do a whole bunch of other things. So just keep that in mind. Like, this is going to look smaller than some other towns because we kept that in mind. So we're allowed to license and regulate cannabis under state law. There's all that boring language you see in every other ordinance, conflicts, purpose, etc. You have a lot of the same definitions that you see in the land use, a lot of the highlighted ones. And again, especially for licensing, we want to be clear of what kind of uses under state law, how they're defined, what we allow, and what we aren't going to allow in Freeport. It's super important to be equally clear on both of those so that there's no gray area. And again, you will see those commercial uses that we just talked about defined in here because we will get into that. So I'm jumping to page 7, happy to go through each definition if you want, but it's not the approach. So you have a couple things in here. So you talk about the different type of cannabis establishments, again, manufacturing and processing, and we talk that each of them will need a license. Again, people doing it outside of their home, they will need a license to grow or manufacture and process cannabis in Freeport. Because we're not regulating medical versus adult use, if you get a license to manufacture cannabis and you happen to be growing it for medical purpose, and then you decide you're going to grow it for adult use, you don't have to change anything with the town. If you're growing, you're growing. That's how this is drafted. Again, there are some exemptions. The qualifying patients that are growing for themselves, the people that are just growing for their own use on, personal use, the exempt caregivers, people that are growing a couple plants for their family members, and the small scale operators that are operating as home occupations will not need a license. So again, we're just talking about those commercial uses. So number 8, you have a submission process. So we're not going to waste any time. If you guys decide to adopt this, within 10 working days, we are going to post notice that the town of Freeport is opening up their licensing process for cannabis establishments. There's some certain notifications. We got to put stuff in a paper. We got to list how many licenses, all of that. And we would keep that application process open for at least 30 days. So people that want to get a cannabis license for those 2 uses in Freeport can have the opportunity to come in and apply. This is drafted so that existing cannabis establishments that are legally operating, and there's a description of what meets that, will be priority when the town of Freeport issues these licenses. And so that's spelt out. And then there's another paragraph that explains anybody else that wants a license can apply. And as we'll get into in a few minutes, there is going to be a limit to the number of licenses in Freeport under this proposal. So if we get more applications than licenses, there'll need to be a lottery to see who can go on to the second and final round of licensing. And that is all outlined in here. Just like any other application, we have a bunch of submission requirements. I'm happy to go through them, or you can just read through. One of the things you will see one change here, again, this is section 8. We have talked to some other sources, and we know if you're not clear on your intent of who can apply for a license, you might get someone that wants to come in and apply for a whole bunch to improve their chances. So we're just gonna put a clarifying clause in there. So it's intended to be one per establishment or entity. So you'll see some language put in there. Yes, question?
Just one quick question to be on section 8, age 21, is that state law or I'm curious?
Where are you?
That is state law?
E3, 21 years. They have to be 21.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep, to grow. Sorry, I thought you said page 21. I was
Oh,
like,
no.
I don't know where your work looking. Yeah, you do have to be 21, and that's written in one of the definitions too. Yep. And then there's a clause in here, should licenses become available in the future. Say someone gets a license and then they leave town and we have one, then we'll kind of go back to the drawing board and there'll be another notice and application for that. I think probably of a lot of interest will be number 9, and that's the maximum number of licenses. So we know in the past there's been interest from the council in limiting the number of licenses in Freeport. So what this proposal here for you to discuss would be 4 licenses for a cannabis cultivation facility and 4 licenses for a manufacturing and processing facility. You could get somebody that wants to do both in their business. I don't, we haven't seen it, so I don't know what the likelihood is, but that would be for a total of 8. And that total of 8 would include those priority applicants that we just talked about and anybody else that wants to submit for the pool. So
If somebody's doing cultivation and processing, do they take 2 licenses, one of
Yes.
each kind? Okay.
Yep, they would take 2. So this starts with the initial application process. We get the applications, we have the priority. If we know the priority applicants are going to use 4 of them or however many they decide, then we would do a drawing of who else submits and see who goes on. And then there's a final application process. And that's the point where it really gets into more of this public process before the town council. So for a final application, they would need to show to you guys that they're licensed through the state, whether it be as a caregiver or for their adult use, whatever option they decide to do. They would need to show you that they've come before the project review board and have their site plan approval, thereby showing you that they meet all those land use standards. The project review board will look at the buffering. At one point, working with the attorney, there were those similar standards in here, but this just really streamlined it, that if they get through PRB, they're doing what the standards are. And so once they make it through the drawing and they know that they can go on to final, they have a year to make sure they get all their ducks in a row before they come back to you. So there is quite a bit of time that license could kind of be in a hold before it gets to you. But if they need to go through site plan and get their licensing from the state and do whatever they need to do on their site, it could take a little bit. Public hearing, pretty standard 7-day notice, put it in the paper, post it in all the usual places. And then there's a section on council action. So you would have the ability, to look at these licenses, have the public hearing. You'd have the ability to put conditions on them. Again, we would still have to have these sites inspected by town staff. And then you would have some flexibility when you grant the license to prorate it to align it with the dates of the state licensing if you wanted to do that. Just so I use the example, it's really obnoxious when your inspection sticker, maybe no one else has this problem, and your registration expire at different times. So similar to that, if you guys wanted to align them, you could have that option, or you could leave it as B. And then section 14 has some standards for approval or denying, if they lied, if they're in violation of their site plan, if they submit false information, if they have a notice of violation, and then you kind of get into the standard sections, more of what if they want to transfer the permit or a process for renewal, that we can get rights to inspect the property should we need to, and then what we would do for violations and penalties. So that's a quick abbreviated version. Happy to answer any questions that you'd have or focus on
One
specific
deals with
areas.
the 1 year to complete and submit the application. It's a lot of time.
Mhm.
But if through something like the town keeps pushing off their application through the review
Mhm.
process, or is there a provision that they can get more time to
There is not. This is written. No, it will be considered abandoned if they don't make application. I don't know. Do you have experience with that in other places?
So I think if the concern is that the town is taking an action that makes it
or
like,
inaction?
Yeah, I think there is there would be an argument around a tort, and I mean it's just bad for the town to do that. But I really, I think if I was approaching that situation, my call would be to the attorney, Because if we had taken the action to bump them, that is different than them not being prepared.
Right.
And so I don't know that you need to deal with that in ordinance, because I think business practices would take care of that, Chip.
And again, like if they have issues with their state licensing, like that's out of our hands. But as far as a site plan perspective, they have additional requirements, but these are simple. I don't want to say simple. These are just site plans.
I'm not saying if they don't get through it, I'm saying there's something that the
Yeah.
town does that I can't imagine.
Like table 12 meetings.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. We don't want to vote on it, or.
Yeah, yeah.
Is there a provision for that? But if the business practices, that's fine.
I have a question. I'm curious about the history of the retail side of things. Sounds like that was a strong stance that was taken at some point. I'm just curious about some of the history of that.
It was a very strong no.
Okay.
At least we got from the people that were here. I mean, obviously it wasn't the whole town. It was, what, 100 people, or not, I don't know if it was even 100 people, but there were quite a few people that came in and were, we don't want retail down, we don't want this downtown. We don't want any retail downtown. That was the big gist of it, but they didn't want retail in the town too.
One of the argument, summarizing it, was basically slippery slope, right? If you do this, then what's to stop us from having every other storefront be a cannabis storefront? And I think at the time, the council as it was back then, I don't think there were any of us that supported retail. I don't put words in anybody else's mouth, but it seemed that there was very strong agreement on the council that we didn't want retail. We have a different council now, we may decide differently, but that's, I think,
Well, I will say I wasn't opposed, because it doesn't stop. I mean, people were worried about the schools getting and all that. Well, we don't have any now, and it's happening, so and just for that argument is what I wasn't opposed to it, but.
Yeah, I don't mean to open up that whole can of worms. I just think that's an interesting conversation of.
Just to disclose that because that was not the council directive and, 4 years ago when we started this, we knew that wasn't the intent. The planning board did not talk about retail, but times change if that's
So it's less that
something
it's
council wants to revisit.
not allowed, it's more like it wasn't addressed. It's just not even.
It's not
touched on.
not allowed because it's not something they were asked to address.
Right.
So they just didn't even go there because at the time, and
Yeah,
4 years
majority said
ago,
no.
yeah, there wasn't support for
It
it.
was also, we're trying to get this, so one of our townspeople can do what they need to do, or what they wanted to do. Sorry. It was a petition from one of the manufacturers in town so that they could sell to a retail store, not have a retail store in town, but because at the time, retail was just coming in, or adult use was just coming in, and so it looked like everybody was going to go to
Retail.
adult use and not use medical,
Yeah.
because it was less expensive, but I think that was it. But
So just from a process standpoint, I was not here when those conversations were happening. But where this has gone through the planning board, one of the things that Caroline and I have been very careful about is not making any change to what the planning board did, because if you make a substantive change to that document, it has to go back through the whole process. So we also know that there might be a different way that we ultimately would like to regulate the number or density of marijuana establishments. But in order to be able to get this through quickly, and it's through land use, we are like, let's just make this initial cap, let's pass this initial ordinance to meet the council's direction, and then if you want to bring it back up, we can absolutely do that.
Yeah, so like similar to solar farms, we put separation buffers between different solar farms, but that's not something that is in this version.
And this is on our agenda for ordinance committee this Thursday.
Just to review.
Just to
so
review,
you
okay.
understand kind of where we were headed.
Got it.
Yeah.
Thursday.
But yeah, we do have a new council, so, tonight, all we're doing is setting the public hearing, but if you do have significant thoughts, by all means, bring them up, at next meeting.
I mean, I certainly don't for this topic, but just curious to see how we got to this point, and as we're learning, as we know, ordinances are living documents, they can be updated and changed, as we so feel.
It only took 4 years to get this to you.
Yeah, more. Yeah, speaking of which, I hear Darrell's voice in my head saying, well, all right, time to get to a vote. So again, all we're doing tonight is setting the public hearings. We're setting 2 public hearings, one for the land use planning stuff, the other for the licensing stuff. I assume that when we come back and do the licensing, we'll need to figure out what our fee structure is as well?
Yeah, Sophie and I have already been talking about that, and
Okay.
if you set the hearing tonight, when it comes back to you for a public hearing, you'll have a pretty fee structure
Great.
to consider as another agenda item.
Awesome, thank you. All right, so I think we are up to Councilor Benoit, if you don't mind reading item 17-24.
Be it ordered that a public hearing be set for February 6th, 2024 at the Town Council meeting starting at 6 PM in Freeport Council Chambers, 30 Main Street, relative to proposed amendments to Chapter 21, Town of Freeport zoning ordinance pertaining to new cannabis uses.
Second.
Thank you, Councilor Lawrence. Let's see if there's no other discussion. We'll move to a vote. Councilor Fournier?
Yes.
Councilor Lawrence?
Yes.
Councilor Benoit?
Yes.
Councilor Smith?
Yes.
Councilor Pillsbury?
Aye.
And I vote yes as well for another unanimous adoption. Which brings us to item 18-24, which is the licensing part of this. We're just setting the public hearing tonight to discuss the changes to the licensing February 6th. So Councilor Fournier, would you mind reading that?
Sure. Be it ordered that a public hearing be set for February 6, 2024 at the Town Council meeting starting at 6 PM in Freeport Council Chambers, 30 Main Street, relative to the proposed new ordinance, Chapter 66, Cannabis Establishments Licensing Ordinance.
Second.
Thank you, Councilor Lawrence. If there's no other discussion, we can move to a vote on this. Councilor Fournier?
Yes.
Councilor Lawrence?
Yes.
Councilor Benoit?
Yes.
Councilor Smith?
Yes.
Councilor Pillsbury?
Aye.
And I vote yes as well. So 6-0 to set that public hearing on February 6th, where we'll have more discussion, I'm sure. Next up is item 19-24, to consider action relative to amending the town fee schedule to include new fees for moorings outside the Harrisika River. And Charlie is sticking around for this if we have questions. I think the only change to this is this is where we say we want to charge $50 if you want to register a mooring outside the Harrisika. That's the only change we're talking about, the only fee we're setting. Okay. Questions, discussions before we read the motion? Councilor Fournier?
The calls I have got is this is too much. The discussions we had when we were talking was a range from $10 to maybe $20, $25. So at $50, I will be opposing that. I think it's too much money.
Got it. And we have a memo too from town manager. Is this on the website as well? Probably not, because it came in kind of late.
It came in.
Okay. But just detailing some estimated costs on what it costs to maintain those registrations. Is that accurate?
So what we looked at is, unfortunately, like other ordinances today, have kind of come into this midstream, but Charlie has been willing and very he's very much up to speed on the program. So we kind of backed into what we think this program costs. So the direct cost, meaning what the town has to write a check for, is $6 per mooring. But then there's staff time to process that, which we estimated 15 to 20 minutes, depending on what he has to do. So that's not just looking at there's back-end work that Charlie has to do with each registration. And so that brings kind of the direct cost of the actual registration itself to $24.69 per mooring. And then there's going to be work to set up the program behind the scenes to promote it. I put in 2.5 hours across the board. Enforcement, Charlie and I are being incredibly optimistic to think that we're going to get 85% compliance on registration. So he thought about what it would take to track down unregistered moorings, and thought it would be maybe 30 minutes apiece, and that's where we came up with that number. And then there's administration and reporting behind the scenes, where we would look at what the finance department has to do, reporting time, that kind of thing, which was a whopping $60 total for the year, which brought that an additional $7.37. This is based on Charlie's estimate of about 120 moorings. Then, so you're at a price at that point. Then Charlie and I spent some time talking about, in general, what is the scope under this registration? Like, why are we doing it, and what's the purpose? And it really has to do with the service that we provide outside of the, in this Anchorage area. And we talked about the fact that from June 1st to October 1st, he spends, he said, anywhere between 25 and 30% of his time in that area dealing with boats, moorings, and things like that. We back that down to, I backed that down to 25%. We used the lower end of that to give you just a sense of when. So Councilor Benoit asked me to go through this exercise. And the reason for that is any fee that the town charges has to be associated with the cost of the service. So when you add that $88.81 per mooring, that brings you up to $120.87. I am not in any way, shape, or form advocating for $120.89. But I am saying, that managing the mooring place is the moorings and the boats in that part of the Anchorage would be kind of the place where council would think about how much tax money it wants to subsidize for that service. But this, I will tell you, I was really impressed with the level of thought and detail that Charlie put in to the conversation, so we weren't just lumping a number in there. So the other thing that we also did, because it's important to know what other communities have done, back when this conversation started, there happened to be an intern in the town manager's office. That intern spent hours and hours calling, researching what all of the communities along the Maine coast are or in our general area are charging. And what we discovered is that there is a wide gap of what people are charging. Most of communities like Freeport would be in excess of $100. Harpswell, I think, is an outlier at $50. The thing that was really interesting is that most of them don't have a difference between like what we would charge in the Harrisika and what they would charge outside. It would be the same. Talking with Charlie, when he applies the same formula that he would use for the Harrisika Anchorage, and I'm really channeling my inner Charlie here, there is a flat rate and then $2.25 per foot. And that would come out to between $150 and $175. So my understanding, I will admit, I did not go back and review the video from Coastal Waters, but my understanding is that the idea of getting the ordinance passed was paramount, and they felt like charging the $50 is the lowest in the region and is a place to kind of start. But if you got the email with the memo, I am not suggesting that we charge $120. Did I do okay? All right.
So I guess one question I have is that $88 per mooring, is that, and that's for outside, right? Or is that all moorings?
No, it's just outside
Outside the Harrisburg anchorage. The time that you spend out there, is that from requests from residents to go out and check their boat, or is that just something that you do as the harbor master?
Yeah, so I looked at it in kind of two different aspects. So I'm dealing with just moorings. I estimated about 25% of my time just dealing with moorings is outside of the harbor, and it's probably about the same with just all general complaints. I spend about 75% of my time in the Harrisburg River, just as an average. Outside can be anything from aquaculture, moorings, debris washing up on folks, shore, you name it. Seals, I get that call, can you come take care of the seal on my property, believe it or not. But when it comes to just moorings, about 25% of my time is, what's this that showed up here? Hey, why is this so crowded here all of a sudden? Where did these 4 moorings come from? So I am going out there and looking, whether it's on Flying Point, out in front of Winslow Park. And I would say it might even be more the last 2 years than 25%. I just kind of took an average of since I've started, in 2018.
Right, but is that, I guess the question is, you do that and that's great. But is it at the direction of someone saying, hey, I've got a problem, or is it you being a good harbor master going out and just checking?
I would say the 25% that I came up with are folks actively getting in touch with me.
Okay, that's the big question, okay.
Yep. I mean, I pop out there all the time, just routinely. If there's not much going inside, I'll hop around Bustins, just doing the regular stuff, but. Yep.
But 25 of the time is people actually asking you to come out and say.
Yeah, we're having questions that I don't know, so then I have to go and take a peek, yeah.
Right.
Yep.
Okay.
Oh, thank you. Counselor Smith first, and then Counselor Fournier.
Yeah, thank you. I think this is really where the most concern was, I think, related to the public hearing, was around the fee, not about the registration. I think one of the reasons we were able to pass the ordinance changes so easily is that most folks who came and spoke at the public hearing were in support of registration and really understanding why it was important for the harbor master to have all of that critical information about where moorings were, who owns the moorings, all of those things. I think the concern that I've heard from comments from a lot of constituents, either directly or in the public hearing, was about the cost. And I understand that there's been a lot of this back and forth about what are the fees that people are getting, or what are the services for the fees. I guess from my perspective, I know we have that flat cost of the $6 per mooring in terms of registering it with the database online. I was really happy to have the staff processing time in the memo, because that was the other thing that I was considering. But I think, Sophie, you mentioned compliance, and I think as we're rolling this out from having folks not have to register at all and pay no fee outside the harbor, I think keeping the fee down is both important for those riparian landowners. I also think it's important to achieve the purposes of the push for registration, to get that information and to get people to comply with this. I'm really in favor of keeping that cost as low as possible. And I'd be much more in favor of $25 than $50, even knowing that that's absurdly low when you look at those other towns. My concern is, how do we roll this out in a way that is responsible and responsive to the concerns of those landowners?
Councilor Fournier, did you have something to say?
I think what I understood when we talked earlier, you are going to have a lot of time initially getting new registrations in, because there are none here. But once they're in the system, it's pretty easy to generate either notices back out or whatever. So hopefully the first year, there'll be a lot of time with data entry and building a program, and after that, it will go down. And again, the calls I had is people are willing to register, they saw the importance of it, and they support the ordinance. It's just a issue of the cost. And I'm not even with $25 with Councilor Smith. I'm thinking of the $15 range. So I certainly can't. So that's where I'm at, and we'll see where the votes go.
I can certainly echo same constituent concerns I heard from my fellow counselors. Also, as I said before, it's not now or never, right? We can sort of try and see how this goes, ease into it, start it lower. I agree with what Councilor Smith was saying with our responsibility of doing this the right way. And then we can get more data on what it actually looks like when we have this ordinance implemented, and then use that data to inform a thoughtful, data-backed fee.
In the memo that you sent out with a cost accounting, that doesn't include any allocation for the boat, the fuel, the wharf, the tying up, all the sort of capital costs that go into Charlie being able to go out and service the mooring. So that, in theory, could raise the effective cost per mooring. Okay.
I also want to echo when I say data back, I'm still very grateful for this, Town Manager Sophie. I think this is great and very helpful to get that conversation going of what we should be looking at.
All right, so the motion that is on our agenda is to adopt the fee schedule included in our package, which calls for a $50 fee. So if we follow the
You've got a hand up for.
Oh, sorry,
Councilor
a hand up from Councilor Pillsbury. Thank you, I appreciate that. Go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, I agree with Eric's point around we want to encourage compliance, and in order to do that, I think we lower the barrier to entry. But I do want to be mindful that the memo was really great in detailing the direct and indirect costs, and there are going to be a cost associated with this new activity, and if it's not borne by the mooring holders, it'll be borne by the rest of the taxpayers. So I just think that's an important point for us to consider and be mindful of. I think it's appropriate to start at a reasonable rate and assess how it's going. So I'm in favor of that, but I do want to make the point that everything that we add to the town is the cost is picked up by the residents of our town.
Fair point. So if we go by our typical order of operations, it'd be up for Councilor Lawrence to read the motion that is before us with the $50 fee. So we
Okay,
start
can
there.
I amend that, though?
You certainly can.
Okay, be it ordered that the amended town fee schedule to include new fees for moorings outside the Harrisika River anchorage be adopted, and that the current fee that says is $50, I recommend it being $15 to get everything going.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion on that motion? For me, that's too low for all the reasons that Councilor Pillsbury and the town manager kind of elucidated. But
I would feel really comfortable with 25, because I think those are hard numbers we can really know will exist in terms of expenses, in terms of the registration fee. We know that's going to happen, and it does take time for this to be developed and put in. So I propose a 25.
So you're offering an amendment to change it to $25?
Yes, yep.
15? Is there a second for that amendment?
Second.
Second from Councilor Pillsbury? Is that right, Matt?
Yep.
Okay. Any discussion on that?
Well, one of the issues I think we have here is people live on the river pay more in taxes. A lot more, significantly more. But they get zero additional services. Name a business that works that way anywhere. You walk in, oh, you could pay more for this and less for that. You have more means, so you're going to pay for this. So I think 15 works for that reason. I mean, they're paying. I don't know how everyone reconciles it, but I've been thinking about it a lot. if they're paying more in taxes and they're getting no more in services, and I know that's the way we have our whole tax system set up, but I don't think that's right. It's the way it is, but I don't think it's right.
Yeah. My view is that they're paying tax on the value of their property. We don't have any say in how that tax is assessed. That's the state law.
No, and that's the process, but.
And they get a more expensive piece of property to use and potentially
Yeah,
sell
but the
one day.
plumber doesn't show up to my house and say, oh, you've got a nice property, I'm going to add $10,000 to this. Right? The carpenter doesn't do that either.
No.
Maybe a little bit, but
When they
not a
sell their
lot.
house on the shorefront, they probably get a lot more money than you get when I sell my house, for sure.
That's true, but anyway.
Councilor Fournier.
Again, the people I had the discussion with were comfortable in the $15 range. I don't think it's right to be upping it more than that. I'll be voting against the amendment because of that, because I am all about having a cost-effective way to get the moorings registered so the harbor master can do his job. And if we can get a little tight on some other areas in town, we could probably save some money to help this important program get going. So I'm in favor of the ordinance. I'm in favor of them registered, as most of the citizens were. It's just the large fee.
All right, so we've got an amendment on the floor for a $25 fee. So why don't we vote on the amendment first, and then we'll vote on whatever the ordinance is, whether it's $15 or $25 or something else. So for the amendment calling for a $25 fee, Councilor Fournier is no?
No.
No. No.
Yes.
Councilor Smith?
No.
Councilor Pillsbury?
Aye.
And I'm a yes as well, so it's 3-3, which means that does not pass, because we've got 6 of us tonight. So then we're back to the original ordinance, which is the $15 fee. So unless there's more discussion on that, we'll do a vote for that. Councilor Fournier?
Yes.
Councilor Lawrence?
Yes.
Councilor Benoit?
Yes.
Councilor Smith?
Yes.
Councilor Pillsbury?
Aye.
And I vote yes as well. So 6-0 on that. So we have a $15 fee, and all moorings should now be registered according to the new ordinance that we have passed. I think I got that right. All right, super.
Can I just add one quick thing?
Yeah, please.
Money in the water is too much, and so.
Too late.
Literally, so what I'm hearing is inside the harbor will stay the same, because before it was.
Correct.
Change it to 50 as well, but up the per foot charge, but we're just saying keep it the same in the harbor. 15 outside, unless you have a rental mooring, which is the same fee that it would be applied to in the river. Because if you're renting it, it's obviously a little different.
That sounds accurate, yep. All right, and thank you again to everybody in Coastal Waters who made all that happen, and to Charlie. I know we said that before, but again, this extends to this as well. Item 20-24, I don't get to explain this one. I get to turn it over to our town manager.
There we go. So as we begin the budget process for FY '25 in Freeport, you kick it off by first establishing when taxes are due and what the interest is going to be on those taxes. My understanding is that the due dates of the taxes are in line with what they normally, you're following the same relative dates as you have in previous years. The interest rate at 8.5% per year is established by the state as the highest interest rate that we can charge. From my experience, if we charge less than what we can, we then become the place that people don't pay because it's cheaper than other places. And then your last item is you're also setting personal property tax exactly the same as real estate. And then the town likes to allow people to pay their taxes anytime. But we don't want to have to pay interest on people paying, so that's what the last item is.
Any questions for the manager? I think it's sort of routine, we do this every year.
You do?
Basically the same
Yep.
format. Counselor Benoit, would you care to read item 20-24?
Be it ordered that 1/2 of the fiscal year 2025 committed taxes for real estate be payable on November 18th, 2024, with interest at the rate of 0.71 per month or 8.5 per annum to be charged from November 19th, 2024, and that the second half of the fiscal year's 2025 committed taxes for real estate be payable on May 15th, 2023, with an interest, 2023, oh my gosh. With an interest rate of 71 cents per month or 8.5% per annum to be charged from May 16th, 2025.
Keep going.
Oh.
Read the further orders.
Be it further ordered that the fiscal year 2025 committed taxes for personal property be payable on November 18th, 2024, with interest at the rate of 71.71 per month or 8.5 per annum to be charged from November 19th, 2024. Be it further ordered that an interest rate of 0% per month or 0% per year be established for overpayment and/or prepayment of taxes.
Second.
Thank you, Councilor Lawrence. If there's no further discussion on this one, we can go straight to a vote. Councilor Fournier?
Yes.
Councilor Lawrence?
Yes.
Councilor Benoit?
Yes.
Councilor Smith?
Sorry, yes.
Okay, Councilor Pillsbury?
Aye.
And I'm a yes as well for a 6-0 approval, which is closely related to item 21-24 to consider action relative to adopting our FY25 budget schedule, which I think is pretty self-explanatory.
I think so.
We have a dozen or so times at which we consider different pieces of the budget. We start with the capital program. Then we look at all the capital operating and TIF budgets. There's a number of public hearings sprinkled in there, a number of informal Q&A sessions with department heads, substantial opportunity for the public to provide input, to weigh in, to offer their thoughts. And this is just laying out the dates and what we do in each date. So with that, Councilor Fournier, would you read the be it ordered for 21-24?
Certainly. Be it ordered that the following FY 2025 budget schedule be adopted.
Second.
Thank you, Councilor Lawrence. Unless there's further debate, we'll call for a vote. Councilor Fournier?
Yes.
Councilor Lawrence?
Yes.
Councilor Benoit?
Yes.
Councilor Smith?
Yes.
Councilor Pillsbury?
Aye.
And I vote yes as well, 6-0. Thank you all. Moving on to item 22-24 to consider action relative to applying for the State of Maine Emergency Medical Services Stabilization Program funds in the amount of $47,000 plus, which will get detailed out in a minute. And I believe we have some background on this directly from Chief Conley. Do you want to give us a little background on what you're asking us to vote on? All right, super. Come on up and give us the scoop.
So a little background is across the state, the EMS system is in crisis. Many services across the state, small, reliant on volunteers and so forth, basically close to closing their doors. So the state, through a Blue Ribbon Commission to study the effects of what's going on in the EMS system across the state, and got the Maine legislature to allocate $31 million for EMS, supplement and EMS deliveries. They put together a grant, and two components is what we're going to talk about tonight, is 40% of that $31 million is doled out to about 272 services across the state, is that formula they come up with. So someplace like, based upon call volume, places like Portland, Bangor Fire, can actually attain about 200,000. We're allocated about 47,000 based upon our call volume and certain metrics that they figured from CMS, Center for Medical Billing. So basically, we have the ability to apply for a grant to get $47,000. And basically, through the manager and I, discussions and so forth, and checking with my peers is looking at, potentially some equipment, but also the opportunity to pay for training cost of the course, as well as taking in, time for them to go to the class. So we're working on basically a plan to kind of obtain as much of that $47,000. So some of it is in some specialized mannequins, the equipment and stuff for training, and that training would be for critical type things that we barely ever get to do, but when you got to do it, you need to. And also too is the training, bringing training here for the people so they don't have to travel, and looking at, some management training, some leadership training, as well as medical training, which goes towards the requirement for relicensing. So that's kind of the quick brush overview.
So I'm just going to add a little bit of color to what Chief is saying, and that is that we are trying to be as vague in our application as the state of Maine will allow us to get away with, because our goal is to try to build capacity. Unfortunately, this is my commentary, not Chief's. I don't want him to get in trouble with his peers. Unfortunately, the state, in allocating $31 million, instead of building capacity in clinical opportunities, time for people to be able to get through AEMT and paramedic classes and get their clinical time, and building regional EMT, AEMT, and paramedic classes, they're divvying it up in a way that all of us are now rushing to try to get United, Southern Maine Community College, and other entities to put on what we really need, which is basic level EMT stuff. And it's, once again, everybody wants to get their share instead of thinking about, as a region, this is what we need. So I think Chief is trying to be creative. The other thing that we're looking at is within the department itself. One of the things that Chief and I have identified in our work plan is capacity building, which takes training and leadership and guidance. So we're going to try to use as much of this to meet existing needs as we can. We also, when we talk about equipment, we're talking about EMS training related equipment, or equipment that will help us build capacity within the department for EMS training. Has to be under $5,000 each, so we're kind of limited in that. But I will applaud Chief Conley. He's really tried to think outside the box and meet existing needs with this money. Unfortunately, again, my commentary, I think the state went at this the wrong way.
I mean, my peer group is that in our discussions are all pretty much centered around what the manager has said, is that we're all scratching our head, but we're all scrambling to get a piece of the pie because we can use it. And basically talking to my peer group is that doling that out in some of the different services are night and day difference based upon their critical needs, their staffing needs. So it's kind of really a wild card in that aspect.
Any questions for the chief and the manager? Councilor Fournier.
Just one question on the verbiage. Shouldn't the bottom sentence say Freeport Fire Rescue Department?
So you would think, but what I used is the language that the state allocated the money in.
Okay, thank you.
I mean, it's just not the right language they use, but.
Any other debate, question? All right, so we are up to Councilor Lawrence, if you don't mind reading item 22-24.
Sure. Be it ordered that the town council authorizes the town manager to execute any and all documents necessary to apply for, accept, and expend up to $47,676.37 of State of Maine Emergency Medical Services Stabilization Program funds for training, including supplies and equipment, and departmental capacity building for the Freeport Fire Department.
Second.
Thank you, Councilor Fournier. If there's no other discussion, we can move to a vote on this. Councilor Fournier?
Yes.
Councilor Lawrence?
Yes.
Councilor Benoit?
Yes.
Councilor Smith?
Yeah.
Councilor
Yes.
Councilor Pillsbury?
Aye.
And yes for me as well for a 6-0 vote. Thank you, Chief Conley, for all the work you put in on this and all the work you're bound to put in now that we've gotten it past this step. And thanks for sticking around till 8:45 as well.
A lot of work yet to go into this big.
Exactly. Okay, the last item on our agenda for action, anyway, we still have some other business and 2 executive sessions. But the last action item is 23-24, and this one would be to consider action relative to appointing people to the 22 Main Street Advisory Committee that we previously established, which currently has nobody on it. So there is room for 7 people on the committee, as listed here. We have currently 2 applications, one from District 1, one from District 2. And we have some names that were suggested for outreach for a business representative, and then, of course, 2 folks from the council. So we have a couple options. We can appoint the people who have applied. We can defer until we have a chance to interview the people that have applied, which is one of the things that was mentioned in the lead up to the meeting. Yeah. So open to thoughts on how you guys want to proceed.
Yeah, I think we should be interviewing this. I want neutral people on here just because we don't know what the town wants. If we put in people that are totally negative against it, that's a problem. If we have people that are already decided that we need this, that's an issue. So I do think we need to interview people that we want to put on this.
I will say the timeline makes me a little nervous because we did ask for a pretty quick turnaround. So that's just putting that out there.
One comment I'll add is I did talk to a representative from the owner of the property who had reached out to say, what's the timeline? And I basically just sent the minutes from the last meeting where we said we're asking for a report by January 1 so that we can expect to get.
June 1, right?
June 1, yeah, sorry. Thank you.
January's already passed.
Yeah, that would be really quick. With the intent being that if we did have a referendum, we would have that in time to be on the November referendum. And he understood why and how we got there. He also mentioned that they may wind up putting it for sale in the spring. So I said I would pass that along, but I think we kind of understood that was a potential outcome with the timeline that we had set. But yes, I would prefer to move quickly to get folks starting to talk about it. Again, the meetings would all be public. The other comment that was made to me by a resident was, what are we doing to promote the fact that we're looking for people to join the board? We only have 2 people applying because most people probably don't know about the opportunity.
I have been asking. I've been promoting it, but.
Let me work with Tom.
Okay.
If you're interested in putting it back out, then let me work with staff and we'll really push it. You've got a meeting in 2 weeks. That seems like a short turnaround. Is it too far to push it further? So like get your application in 2 weeks and then go to the appointments committee, right? Is that how that would work? And then come back?
I think we can piecemeal. I mean, it'd be nice to have all the interviews at one time, but if we get people that are coming in, let's interview them and see where they are. And it can be kind of a first come, first served type thing, but.
Yeah, Councilor Fournier?
I think it's important we pass this tonight, so we establish the committee, and then,
We did. We've already
Okay, well
established,
then-
and this is just appointing people to that committee.
Okay, well, all right, then.
Yeah, it's an empty committee at the moment, right? Yeah, Councilor Benoit?
And so to be clear, we'd be looking for all district applicants or just 3 and 4 because we have potential applicants for 1 and 2?
I think everybody for now, because we haven't.
Yeah, everybody, right.
Yeah, we might not take action tonight, so.
Yeah, and, we want to find out who's where.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm, if the town wants it, fine. I personally don't think we need this right now with everything else that's going on. But I do to give it a fair shake. Let's ask.
So timing, do you think we're due for bringing this back in 2 weeks or in 4 weeks?
I think I would bring it back in 4. I think I'd put it out for 2, give the appointments committee a week, and then bring back.
Yeah, well, I think we could try for 2 if we get the applicants within 2, and if we don't, then push it off to the next one. I mean, it's just a matter of right, getting applicants.
So do you want to table this one?
Yeah, so we'll table till February 6th, and then we can table again if we don't have what, if we're not comfortable on February 6th. So, so I
make a motion to
go for it.
Table this item till our next meeting.
February 6th.
February 6th, and if we don't have enough applicants, then to the next meeting.
Got it. Is there a second for that?
Second.
Thank you, Councilor Fournier. Any other discussion on that? So we'll go for a vote. Councilor Fournier?
Yes.
Councilor Lawrence?
Yes.
Councilor Benoit?
Yes.
Councilor Smith?
Yes.
Councilor Pillsbury?
Aye.
And I'm a yes as well, 6-0. So we'll table that. We'll bring it back on the 6th. We'll try and do some outreach in the meantime. We'll hold off on interviewing until after next week. Yeah, well, maybe we'll try and get an appointments committee scheduled for a week after next.
Yeah.
So we can
get at least a couple of more.
we might be able to get, even if we get it partially staffed, they might be able to start meeting. Okay, skipping over some previously tabled items, we are down to other business, where I think Sophie was going to give us an update on senior property tax rebate options.
I am going to give you a brief update and make a recommendation. Yes. Well, you guys told me you wanted recommendations when you interviewed me. So the question that I'm coming back with is Councilor Fournier had asked if we could look into the statute that allowed municipalities to enact local ordinances that would allow seniors to get rebates or assistance with their property tax. So Chapter 36, Section MRSA, Section 907, sorry, that's 907A, Section 6232 gives municipalities the right to adopt one of 2 kinds of ordinances around property tax relief for seniors. One is if you're over 65 years of age, 62 years of age, there is you can adopt a means-tested program. That program is supposed to wait, so people with less income get more benefit than people with more income. And it also has to include both owner-occupied and renters, not people who own rental property, but the renters themselves. So we did, and the second program, which I don't think is what Councilor Fournier was talking about, it allows seniors over the age of 60, the community to adopt an ordinance for seniors over the age of 65 who want to volunteer their time to essentially work off part of their, and it's, that just, to me, that is not what you wanted. So we really focused on option 1 as opposed to option 1A. I had one group of people look at areas around, communities around us. I will tell you, the town of Cumberland has a very robust program. The town manager and council there took advantage of this when it first came out. So there was a lot of documents. I've talked with the town manager previously about this program. And then I also had Min take a look, our assessor, take a look at it. There are lots of decisions that kind of need to be made from council. The creation of the ordinance is not going to be difficult. You have to be 62 years old. You have to have a homestead, so you have to have lived in the community. the council can put a number of years that they've had to live in the community. So to give you a sense, in Cumberland, and I'm just using that as the example, they require people to be at least 70 years old. They require them to have lived in Cumberland for at least 10 years in their property. And they also have a limit, the highest income level that you can have it be a household of $91,000 a year, household income of $91,000 a year. They've created a sliding scale. So you look at 200 base rebate of $200, and then the more money you have, the less money you'll get. That adds to that. So if you go all the way down to somebody with a household income of less than $30,000 a year, who has met all the other eligibility requirements in Cumberland, that person would get $750 back on their taxes. We had a lot of conversation here about if you're cutting a check to send it back, which is the proper way to do it. Aren't we now going to run afoul of state and federal tax rules where we would then have to tax them on that? So we were really, for a while, geared in that $599 or less so that they wouldn't have to get a 1099. But in looking at the statute, the state of Maine classified it as for property owners, tax assistance, that is classified as non-income assistance, so it doesn't have to show up on your main income tax. I worked with MMA, Maine Municipal Association Legal Services, and what they trolled through the IRS stuff for me, and what they found is a clause that makes it look like property tax assistance for owners would also not be taxable. So I put a call in. They've recommended that I reach out to IRS in Augusta. I have done that. I'm waiting for confirmation. But it would look like we could give whatever amount council ultimately decided free in terms of not having to give any kind of 1099. For renters, that's different because it's not a direct tax reimbursement, so there would be a 1099 with that. So I asked Min if we suspended reality for a moment and just assumed that everybody who applied for and received funding from LD 290 was given $1,000. Just that would be the outside maximum by a lot. So just so you're aware, that would be 629 applicants, so $629,000. If the value didn't change at all in Freeport, that would be 28 cents on the mill rate, or for if we grew by $47 million, it would be nothing on the mill rate. Even talking with Min, we think this number is going to be significantly less. The good news is that you would be adopting it. If you adopted it now, we take 1 year of a risk because you'd adopt it now. They would be applying for the previous year. So we would know, once we knew who the applicants were, they would be applying for the previous year, and we would be processing the payment and making the payment.
Turn your mic on.
It is.
Oh, okay.
It is.
Sorry. It looks off. Thank you.
Processing the payment and making it the following spring. So we could do the cycle, so after the first year, we would know pretty much what our costs would be. So my recommendation is the ordinance committee is meeting on Thursday. One of the items that is on that agenda is committee priorities. And I think we could very quickly reach some recommendations to bring back on February 2nd about the dollar amount that you would be looking at, that table. I thought the table was a little confusing to try to work through with a whole big group, but, and I would suggest that we use Cumberland as our,
That's exactly what I'm looking for. I like the template, I like the sliding scale, I think that's more fair. And I come up with an age of 65 simply because the majority of people, when they get on Social Security, that seems to be the age now they need assistance. But anything we can do, I think, to help with the sliding scale, so if you have more in retirement, you should get less. And if you have less, you should get a little more. So I agree with the way you're going, and I'd love to see the ordinance committee take that a priority, have something we can pass before our next tax bill goes out. That would be awesome.
my goal would be, if it's easy and the committee likes the recommendations I'm going to bring forward, that we'd be able to potentially call a public hearing, review, do the first read in February, and be able to adopt this before you are committing to the final budget.
Is that the deadline to have it in place for this fiscal year, would be to have it done by the time we adopt the final budget?
Yeah, because you're going, the way this works is the town commits all of the taxes, it collects all of the taxes, and then it gives the money back.
Sounds like a fair plan, yeah?
Does that work?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you for the recommendation.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you, Sophie. So we'll take it up Thursday in ordinance, see where it goes. Okay, so next up, we have a sixth order of business, part 2, which is more public comment for anybody on Zoom who wants to offer public comment. I think we're down to just one person who... Okay. So Jim wants to offer public comment, he can. But if there are no hands going up on Zoom, then I will go ahead and close the public comment, or the virtual public comment. And our last two remaining items are both executive session items. Is it fair to say we don't anticipate coming back into public session, taking any action as a result of these executive sessions? Okay.
So,
Don't we have to say we're going and come out and close the meeting?
Yeah, we'll come out and close the meeting, but we don't intend to take any action.
and we don't tend to do that back on Zoom. Tom, did you get a Zoom?
We have a new Zoom, they will have an invite in their email.
All right, so the counselors on Zoom, you should have an invite in your email for a Zoom meeting that is just an executive session. I see Counselor Pillsbury shaking his head.
Matt, do you have a link for that?
Caroline, you want to send that again?
Yep, I can send it. I came
Did it just come?
directly
Yes.
from 20 minutes ago.
20 minutes ago?
Huh?
We're sending it again.
Okay, thanks.
Caroline, just Caroline. Oh, yeah, Brett, sorry, Brett. No, they're staff. You can just say they're coming if you want.
Okay, so did we lost a counselor, but I think we're okay. So the first executive session is item 2424, to consider action relative to an executive session pursuant to 1 MRSA 405-6C pertaining to a real estate matter dealing with town-owned property at 55 Main Street in Freeport. And the suggestion is this would be for council, as it always is, with additional staff. We might invite the planner, and the recommendation, invite Brett from FEDC as well. So I move that the town council enter executive session.
Second.
Thank you for that. We need a roll call vote on this. Councilor Lawrence?
Yes.
Councilor Benoit?
Yes.
Councilor Smith?
Yes.
Councilor Pillsbury?
Aye.
And I vote yes as well, which for 5-0, since Councilor Fournier is temporarily excused, but I think that's enough to get us into executive session. So we'll meet you two guys on the other Zoom link. And thank you to everybody else for attending.
Do we need, Tom, do you have to hang out
so
Nope,
that
I
they
don't.
have-
I'm gonna make you self-contained in this room.
So he'll be able to see us, they'll be able to see us and.
On that computer.